What's going on, guys? So this week I have a pretty good size project for you. This video will probably be 2, maybe even 3 hours long. I'm not sure, but we're going to be building a full stack application using the MERN stack, MongoDB, Express, React, and Node.js. We're also using Redux Toolkit for state management. And the main focus for this is authentication. I want you guys to be able to have this as kind of a starting point for any application where you want to implement JSON web tokens and authentication. Now, there's easier ways to do this. You could use a third-party service like Auth0, and that's fine, but I think it's important for you guys to know how to do this from scratch. So we'll be using JSON web tokens, but instead of storing the token in local storage, like you see so many tutorials do, including some of my own past tutorials, we're going to store it in an HTTP-only cookie, which is it's more secure and less susceptible to things like cross-site scripting attacks. All right, so we'll start off with the back end, creating an API with register, login, logout, and then profile routes. And then we'll move to the front end and we'll build the user interface. And you can see it's very simple. We're using the React Bootstrap library. So if you want to customize the look and customize Bootstrap, of course, you can do that. And then we're going to deploy it to Linode, which I'll talk about in a second. But just to give you a quick demo, we have the home page, which is very simple. We have a sign-in page, a register page. So let's just go ahead and sign in. And we're using React Toastify for, messages and things like that. So I'm going to sign in with john@email.com. Okay, so now you can see we're logged in because up here we no longer have the sign in and sign up links. We have the username, John Doe. And if we click on this, we have a drop down with profile. And from here, it'll just give you the profile name and email address. And you can update any of these, including the password. Okay, so we'll have a route on the back end to get the profile data, and we'll have a route where we send a put request to update the data. But that's really it. Pretty simple. We log out, and what that'll do is on the back end, it will destroy the cookie, and it will also clear local storage because we will be storing non-sensitive user data in local storage. Okay, and like I said, we'll be using Redux Toolkit to manage state. So this is also kind of like a Redux Toolkit crash course as well. And I'll have all the final code here in this repository, and I'll have that link in the description, as well as a link to a couple blog posts that will basically be a written version of this entire project. Now, like I said, we'll be deploying to Linode, who recently integrated with a company called Akamai, and they're sponsoring this video. And we've been working with Linode for years, and they're my go-to for any project where I want complete control of my server. You can install and customize everything down to the operating system itself. And they have a ton of one-click apps and stacks to get you up and running quickly. Now, when it comes to pricing, what really sets them apart is with a lot of cloud hosting providers, you end up with all these strange charges, and it ends up being a lot more than you thought, where with Linode/Akamai, there's caps on these plans. So this dedicated 4 gigabyte plan isn't going to go over $36 per month. And these are dedicated CPU plans. There's shared CPU plans for much cheaper. As you can see, $5 per month. But what I'm going to do is put a link in the description that's going to give you $100 credit over 60 days. So you can follow along with this tutorial. You can deploy your own projects absolutely free. And I can't say enough good stuff about Linode. We've been working with them for years. They have phenomenal support. They have very reliable servers. So check them out. Links in the description for $100 free over 60 days. And let's get started with our project. Okay, so we're starting from absolute scratch. You can see I just have an empty folder called MERN Auth, and I'm using VS Code, but of course you can use whatever you'd like. And this is going to take a while. It's a pretty big project relative to YouTube tutorials, and I would suggest that you follow along with me. Get a tea, get a coffee, sit down, and just follow along. And if you need to do it in multiple sessions, of course, that's fine. But yeah, we're going to start from scratch. So let's open up a terminal. And I do expect that you have a little bit of experience with React and with Node.js and Express. At least you should be able to create a route. You understand how HTTP works. you should be able to create a React component, things like that. You don't have to be a senior developer or anything, but you should have just a little bit of experience. I would say if you watch my React crash course along with my Express crash course, then that would be enough. So I'm going to start off here by running npm init to generate a package.json, and we'll just say -y so we don't have to answer the questions. And then what we're going to do is install our backend dependencies. Now the way that this is going to work, or the structure of our folders, is going to be the root will have our server-side package.json. So Express, everything like that is going to be listed in here. Then we'll have a backend folder that's going to have our models, our controllers, things like that, all of our backend source code. And then later on, when we get into React, that will all be put in a front-end folder. So we'll have a completely separate folder for front-end and back-end. That's just how I like to structure my single-page application projects. And you might wonder why I'm not using Next.js or Remix, something like that, because I think that it's important to learn. If you're going to learn React, I think it's important to learn how to build single-page applications first, because that's what React was initially intended for. I know things are changing now, and server-side rendering is really popular, and I definitely would suggest learning Next.js or Remix, but I think that it's important to learn the basics of React first and state management and all that. All right, so, and you could definitely redo this in Next.js if you want. So as far as our server-side dependencies, we're going to install Express, which of course is our web framework. We're going to be using .env, which will load environment variables from a .env file. Mongoose, which we're going to be using to interact with our MongoDB database when we get to that. We also want bcrypt.js for hashing our passwords, and then JSON Web Token because we're using JWTs for authentication. And we're going to, like I said, we're going to be storing them in an HTTP only cookie. So we're also going to install Cookie Parser so that we can parse our cookies. All right, so let's go ahead and install those. Okay, so once those are installed, we're going to just create a very basic Express server. So like I said, I'm going to have a folder called Backend. And then in that Backend folder, we're going to have a file called server.js. This is the entry point for our server, for our backend, for our API, whatever you want to call it. Now, instead of using common JS where we say const express equals require express, lately I've been using ES modules in the back end, which is really simple to do now. All we have to do is in our package.json, we're just going to add, we can put this anywhere, but right here I'm just going to add type, and we're going to specify, instead of common JS, we're going to specify module. So that will allow us to use the import syntax, which I prefer. And it's good to use because that's what you use on your front end, so it's good to have them match. So we're going to import Express from Express. And for now, I'm just going to put the port number directly into a variable. We'll use our .env file in a few minutes, but for now, we just want to get this set up. So then we want to initialize our app variable, set that to Express, and we want to listen. So app.listen on the port. And then I'm just going to have an arrow function with a console log. And in the console log, we'll put some backticks. And let's say server started on port. And then we'll put in that port variable. Okay, now as far as a route, I'm just going to add a route to the index for now. So app.get. And that's just going to go to /. Then we'll have our callback. And we want request response, and I'm just going to respond by sending just a string back and say server is ready. Okay, so just that we should be able to run this with node and then backend / server.js, and you can see it's running. So I'm going to stop that. Oops. I'm going to stop that, and in our package.json, we're going to add a couple scripts here. So we'll have a start script, and that's going to run what I just did. So it'll run Remember, it's in the root, so we need to specify the backend folder /server.js. And then I'm also going to install Nodemon so that we don't have to keep restarting our server every time we make a change. And that's going to be a script called server. I'm not going to call it dev because we're going to have a front end as well, and the dev script will run both the front and the back end. Server will run just the back end with Nodemon. So let's say Nodemon and then backend /server.js. Okay, now of course we have to install Nodemon, so I'm going to install that as a dev dependency. So I'm going to use uppercase D and then Nodemon. And we should see that get added. There it is as a dev dependency. All right, so now if I go ahead and I run npm run server, it should run our server using Nodemon. So next thing I want to do is implement .env. So in the root, not in the back end, but in the root, I'm going to create a file called dot, so period, and then env. Okay, and from here, I'm going to add two things. One is going to be my node env, which I'm going to set to development. And then we're also going to have our port, which I'm going to set to, for right now, I'm going to set it to 8,000, just so we can make sure it's working. So back in our server.js, we need to do a couple things. So we're going to import .env from .env. And then we have to run the config method. So we could just do .env.config like that. And then here, where we're setting the port, what we're going to do is say first look in process.env.port, or if that's not there, then use 5000. So if I save, you can see down here, usually we have to restart this, but I guess not. So server started on port 8000 because it's looking at that environment variable. But I'm going to set that to 5000, and now you can see now it's running on 5000. Okay, and now we can use process.env.nodeenv whenever we want to get the environment we're in, whether it's development or production. So another thing we should do is in the root create a .gitignore, and in here we want to, of course, add our node modules, because when we push to GitHub or wherever, we don't want node modules included. I also don't want the .env included. So we'll go ahead and add those two files. All right, now the next thing I want to do is start to create our routes. Now, just to show you real quick, you guys don't have to type this out, but I just want to show you the actual routes that we'll be creating. So first off, we're going to have a route to register a user. That's going to be a post request to API/users. To authenticate or log in to set our token, that will be a post request to API users auth. And then to log out or clear the cookie will be API users logout. To get the user profile, which will be a protected route, will be API users profile, a GET request, and to update will be a put request to that same URL, API users profile. So those are the, 5 routes that we want to create, or endpoints that we want to create. So obviously we don't want to put all of that in the server.js. So what we're going to do is in the back end, we're going to create a folder called routes. All right, now in here, we're going to have a file called user_routes.js. Now we could put all of our logic in this file, but I think it's good practice to have your logic in a controller. So we're also going to create in the back end a folder called controllers. And inside that, we're going to create a file called user_controller.js. All right, now in our user routes, we're going to basically link to our controller functions. So let's start off in our controller and create those functions. So the first one will be to authenticate a user or log in. I'm going to call it auth user. And I'm using an arrow function. You don't have to, but that's how I'm going to set these up. And all of these are going to take in the request response. And then all I'm going to do for now is just do a res.json. Actually, I like to do the status as well. So we'll say status 200 and then .json. And then we'll have in here just a message for now. Say message, and we'll say auth user, just whatever the route does. Okay, just to get started. Now, what I like to do, and if you guys have taken any courses from me where we use Node.js and we use routes, I like to create a couple comments here. So first is going to be the description of what this does. So we'll say auth user and let's say /set token. And then I also like to put the route, what the route is going to be, which in this case is going to be a post request to /API/users/auth. And then also the access. So is it protected or not? Is it private? So this one is going to be public. And that just means that you don't have to be logged in to access this route. It's not protected. So before I create any other routes, I just want to export this one. So I'm going to say export, and we're going to be exporting a bunch of functions from here. So we're going to use curly braces, and then let's export auth user. And then what we'll do is go into our user routes. And in order to use the express router, we first need to import express from express, and then we can create the router. So let's say const router equals express.router with an uppercase R. All right, and then this needs to be exported. So let's say export as default router. And then what we'll do is say router, we want to handle a post request to /auth. And the reason I'm not putting /API/users/auth is because API/users is going to be connected to this whole file. So we only need to put whatever would be after that. And then I'm going to have my auth user, my controller function here, which I just auto imported as our callback. And I'm just going to move this down. And one thing I want to mention is that since we're using ES modules on the back end by putting type module in the package.json, when we use the import syntax and we're importing our own JavaScript file, we do have to add the extension or it's going to give us a module not found error. So just be aware of that. So we'll go ahead and save that. And the last thing we need to do to try this route is in the server.js, we're going to import our user routes. So user routes, and that's going to be from routes/user routes, and be sure to add .js onto it if you're using the import syntax like I am. And then let's go right above the app.get here, and we're going to say app.use, and say for anything where we go API users, that's going to be connected to the user routes. Now I'm going to be using Postman to test everything out. So I'm going to open that up and I'm going to create a new workspace, which you don't have to do. You can simply just open up a new tab and send the request, but I like to set it up like this. So MERN auth, I'm going to make it personal, create workspace. And like I said, you can just open up a tab and make a request, but what I'm going to do is create a new environment. So right here under environments, let's say new, and then environment, and I'll call this MERN auth, and I'm going to add a variable for the API URL. So we'll say actually we want to put the name of the variable here, so base URL, and then here we're going to put HTTP localhost port 5000 or whatever port you used, and then /API. Okay, I'll put that there, and then for the current we're going to put the same thing, so HTTP localhost port 5000 /API. All right, now what we'll do is save this first of all, so we'll click save, and then on right here where it says no environment, I'm going to choose MERN auth. So now what I should be able to do is create a new request and make it a post request, and I'm going to do double curly braces and then base, and you'll see it comes right up, base URL. And then all I have to do is /users/auth because the localhost /API is already in the base URL. So let's send that, make sure it's a post request, and you should see message auth user. because obviously we have no functionality yet. It's just going to give us this message object. All right, now I like to save my requests in collections as well. So I'm going to go to collections and say new and collection, and we'll call this users. And yeah, I think that should do it. So users, and then inside collections is where I want to save this request. So let's see, if I go right here and say save as, and then choose users, and then the request name, what I'll usually do is say like post, and then whatever the, I'll say API/users. So now I have this request saved, so I can always just come to it and I can make that request. All right, again, you don't have to do all that setup. You can just pop open a new tab and use it. All right, cool. So let's see, the next thing that I'm going to want to do before I add the rest of my controller functions, we're going to use an async handler, because the mongoose methods that we're going to be using within these functions return a promise, and I want to use async await. So we're going to be making all of these async. Okay, so we'll put that there for now. We don't technically have to use an async handler. We could just put, you know, a bunch of try catches, but what the async handler will do is we wrap it around each controller function, and it will handle the errors, and it will allow us to use our custom error handler, which we're also going to create soon. Now, there's a few ways we can do this. We could create our own, which is what we did in the e-commerce course, but I'm going to actually just stop the server and install express-async-handler, and then we can run the server again. And all we need to do is bring it in. So let's import, say, async handler, and that's going to be from express async handler. And then for all these functions, we just want to wrap it. So I'm going to go right here at the beginning of async and say async handler, and then an open parenthesis, and then just put the ending parenthesis at the very end here after the ending curly brace. And that's it. So, I mean, it's not going to make any difference right now, but it'll allow us to use async await and not have to wrap everything in try catches. All right, so now that we've done that, let's create our custom error handler. So we're going to actually create a middleware folder. So in Backend, let's create a folder called middleware. And inside that, let's create a file called error middleware. Error middleware.js. Because the default middleware for Express it's an HTML page, and we're creating an API, so I want our errors to just be a JSON object that has an error message, and the stack trace if we're in development. So we're going to create two middleware functions here. The first one will be used as basically a catch-all for any routes that don't exist. So if you go to some route that we don't have a controller for, then this will be thrown. The second will be used as a catch-all for any errors that occur in our routes. So in our routes, we'll be able to say throw error and then put some kind of message in here, or throw new error. And that's what I want to be able to do. So the first one is going to be called not found. And this is going to be a function that takes in request, response, and next. Next is just the callback that we fire off once we're done, and we're basically saying run the next piece of middleware. So all I'm going to do here is say const error and say new error, and in backticks here we'll say not found dash, and then whatever the URL is. So request, on the request object we have an original URL property, so we're just going to output that, and then we'll set the status. So res.status, we'll set that to 404, which means not found, and then we'll go ahead and call the next piece of middleware, and we're going to pass in that error. Okay, so that's the first one. The next one we're going to call error handler. And this is going to take in addition to request, response, next, it's going to take in error as the first argument. And if you do that, Express knows that this is your custom error middleware. So let's say request response next, and then we'll have our function here, and I'm going to just initialize a variable called status code. And basically, we're going to set this to res.statuscode, and we're going to check to see if that's equal to 200. Because if we throw an error, a manual error that we're creating, the status might still be 200. But if we're throwing an error, we don't want it to be 200. So we're going to say, if it's equal to 200, change it to 500. Else, then just use whatever res.statuscode is. So if it's not 200, just use whatever it is. All right, then we're going to initialize a message variable as well, which we'll set to error.message. Okay, so the message that's on this right here. Now, with Mongoose, we have a specific type of error called a cast error, and it gives kind of a weird message if you just leave it as the default. So I actually want to check for that. So we're going to say if the error.name, because it has a name property, and if it's equal to cast error, okay, and we can check the kind. It has a kind property as well, and we want to check that for object ID. So basically, if you try to get a user with an object ID that doesn't exist, then this is going to fire off. And if this does happen, then I want to set the status code to 404, which is just a not found. And then I'm going to set the message equal to, let's say, resource not found. Okay, so we're just adding on to these variables up here that we initialized. And then finally, we want to set a status, so res.status, whatever the status code variable is, and then .json. And what I want my errors to look like I said, I just want it to have a message, which is going to be whatever the message is. And of course, since these are the same, we can just do that. And then also, we'll have the stack trace if it's in development. So I'll say stack, and then process.env.node_env. If that is equal to production, then I want this to be null. Else, then I want it to show the error stack, which is, it can be helpful, showing you the line numbers and stuff like that, files and line numbers. And then finally, we just want to export both of these. So we're going to export the not found, and we're going to export the error handler. All right, now just creating these isn't going to do anything. We now have to bring them into our server.js and add them as middleware. So I'm going to go right here, and I'm going to import not found and also error handler from the middleware / error middleware.js. And then we just have to pass those into app.use. So I'm actually going to put this down at the bottom right here and say app.use and not found, and then also app.use error handler. Okay, so that should do it. Now, if I were to go into my controller here, and let's say something happens here where we want to throw an error. Well, first I would set the status. So I'd say res.status, and let's say, I don't know, 401, which is a user error, a client error. And then we could say throw new error, and then I could put whatever message in here. I'll say something went wrong. So now if I save that and I go back over to Postman and I send to that route, you'll see I get back a 401 unauthorized. That's what it is, unauthorized, which is still a client error. And then message something went wrong. And then I also see the stack trace because I'm in development, right? And this would be null if I was in production. So that's pretty helpful. If we weren't using that custom error middleware, like if I comment these two lines out, and then I go back to Postman and I send that, we get the default error handler, which is an HTML page, which of course we don't want. Okay, so that's why I created a custom error handler. And you can do a lot more. This is just kind of the base error handler that I like to use in pretty much all of my APIs. But let's go ahead and we can close up the error middleware. We can close up the routes for now. And let's get rid of that, what we just did, that error. And now I just want to create the rest of our routes. And for now, they'll just output a JSON object with a message. So let's copy this. So the next one is going to be to register a user. So let's get rid of this for the description. And we'll say register a new user. And the route is going to be a post request to API/users. It's going to be public. And let's change the name of the function to register user. And then for now, I'm just going to send out a message that says register user. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and add another function. This one is going to be the logout. So let's say logout user. And then we're just going to change the route here to /logout. And we'll change the function to logout user. And then let's just change the message here. Logout user. All right, then the next one is going to be to get the user profile. So let's say get user profile. It's going to be a GET request, and then it's just going to be API users /profile. And this is going to be private. So let's say private, meaning you'll have to have a token. You'll have to have a valid JSON Web Token for this. And let's make this, let's say get user profile and say user profile. And then the last one is going to be to update the user profile. So let's say update user profile. And it's going to be to user /profile, just like the one above, except it's going to be a put request because we're updating. And that's also going to be private. Okay, and then we'll change this to, let's say, update user profile and change the message here. Okay, and then we just need to export all of these. So I'm just going to put this on the next line. And then let's see, we have auth user, we have register user, we have logout user, get user profile, and update user profile. Cool. So I'm going to copy these because we need to import them into our routes. So let's go to our user routes. And right here, we'll just go ahead and import all of those. And now we just want to basically connect the routes to those functions. So let's see, for the auth, that's going to be a post request as well. I'm sorry, for the register. So I'm going to copy that down. Now the register is just going to be to / because it's a post request to /API/users. All right, so that's going to handle the register. And then the logout, let's copy that down. Let's say logout user. Oops. So this will be /logout, and it will be a post request, so we can leave that. And then let's see, the /profile is going to have two different methods, right? So /profile/profile, but one is a get and one is a put. So I could create two separate lines like router.get and router.put, or we could do this. We could say router.route and then put the endpoint, which is going to be /profile, and then just attach get and whatever function I want for that, which is going to be get user profile. And then I could also just chain onto that .put, and then in there I want update user profile. All right, so all of our routes should now be connected to these functions in the controller. So we can test that out by going to Postman. and we can create these requests in our collection. And I'm actually going to rename this just so this is more readable. So we know that this will authenticate or log in. Let's say login user for that route. And then right here, for where the user's collection is, let's say add request, and let's call this one register user, and then that's going to be a post request to our base URL. So base URL, and then slash users, let's see, yeah, just slash users for the register. And if I send, let's see, auth user, did I not change? Wait a minute. So registers a new user, post request to API/users, and then in our routes, router.post/, oh, so right here, this should be register user. Okay, so now if I go back to Postman, I send that again, now we get register user, which is correct. And I'm just going to save this. All right, now let's create another request. So this one, let's say log out user, which is going to be a post request to our base URL, and then slash users slash logout. Let's send it. We get logout user. I'm going to save that. Now let's create another add request. This is going to be, let's say, get user profile. And it's going to be a get request to our base URL slash users slash profile. Okay, that works. Let's save. And finally, we have the update route. So let's go to add request and say update user profile. That's going to be a put request to our base URL slash users slash profile. Send that. We get update user profile. We'll save that. So now we have all of our authentication routes here that we can easily access and easily make those requests. Okay, so now that we're set up with this, what I'd like to do in the next part of this video is set up our database. And you can do that at mongodb.com. So you just want to sign in, sign up and sign in. I'm going to use this. Yeah, I'm going to use this login here. And I already have a database set up, but I'm just going to go through and create another one. So basically, when you sign up and you sign in, you're not going to see anything here. I've already created a cluster. So first thing you're probably going to be asked is to create an organization, which I've created, Traversy Media. And then from there, you'll create a project. You can see I have one called ProShop, but I'm going to create another one here and just call it MERN Auth. And click Next and create project. Okay, so once that's done, we can then build a database, and I'm going to choose the free package here. I'm going to keep AWS as the provider. You can rename your cluster if you want. I'll just call it MERN Auth, and then create. Let's see, some of these are just crazy. That one's all right. Okay, so now you want to create a database user. So I'm going to call mine just Brad123. Password, I'm just going to do Brad123 for now. And then make sure you click Create User. And then from here, you want to add your current IP address, and it should already be added. If not, you can click on this, and we should be good. So click Finish and Close, and then go to Databases. And now you can see I have my MERN Auth database. And it's still being set up right now, but we should be able to still do some stuff. And what I want to do is go to Browse Collections. And if we had data here, you would see it. We don't, but I'm going to click on Add My Own Data. And here I'm going to give the database a name. Otherwise, it's just going to be called Test. So I'm going to call it MERN Auth. And then a collection name, we're going to have a collection called Users. So with collections, you don't have to manually create them like this every time. You can just do it through your code. NoSQL databases are very, you have a lot of freedom, and they're not strict at all like relational databases where you have to, create every table with all of the different columns, all the fields and the field types. You get much more freedom with NoSQL. You can do all that at the application level. So let's click Create, and now we have a database called MERN Auth with a users collection. So now what we want to do is go back to this screen here and click on Connect. And if you want, you can download MongoDB Compass. Just Google MongoDB Compass, download it. It's a desktop. And if you want to connect to that, what you can do is open it up. And right here where it says Compass, you can click on that, copy that connection string, and paste that in here. And you just got to replace your password. This is optional. This is only if you want to use Compass to see your data directly. So if we do that, I believe that should be good. All right, and over here you'll see MERN Auth, and we have our users collection. So if I had any data, it would show here. And I'm just going to keep this open just in case we need it. So to connect to our application, you want to, again, click Connect. And this time you're going to click on Drivers. And we're going to grab this connection string right here. And then we're going to go into our project. And in the .env, we're going to create a Mongo_URI environment variable, and then paste that in. Now we have to change some things here, such as the password. So let's say Brad123 or whatever your password is. Also right here, after this slash, you want to put the name of your database, which I called mine MERN Auth. Okay, so we'll save that, and now we should be ready to connect to our database. So in our backend folder, I'm going to create a new folder called config. And then in config, I'm going to create a file called db.js. And we're going to use Mongoose here. So let's import Mongoose from Mongoose. And we're going to have a function called connectDB. And this is going to be an asynchronous function because everything we do with Mongoose is going to be asynchronous. And we'll just have a try catch in here. And let's create a variable called con, and this is just standard, standard connection function. We're going to await on mongoose .connect, and that's going to take in our Mongo URI, which is in our env file. So let's say process.env and then Mongo_URI. All right, and then underneath that, I'm just going to do a console log. And let's put some backticks in here, and we'll say MongoDB connected. And I also want to put the host, so I'm just going to do colon, and then we'll put our variable in here, which is going to be that con object. And then in that we have connection, and then we have host. And then if there's an error, what we'll do is just do we'll do a console error. Actually, I don't think I have that. Yeah, it's console.error, and we'll put some backticks in here, say error, and then whatever message is on that error object. So error.message, and then we're going to exit with failure. So process.exit and pass 1 in there. All right, and that should do it. So we just want to export default connectDB. So now we want to call that in our server.js. So let's go to server.js. Let's bring it in. We'll bring it in, just bring it in right here, I guess. And we're going to import connectDB from config.db.js, and then we're going to run this. You can really do this anywhere. I'm just going to do it right above where we initialize Express. So connectDB. So when you save now, you should see down here in the console MongoDB connected and the host. If you don't, it's most likely an issue with your string. So you want to make sure that this is perfect, that it has the correct password, has the correct database, and then in MongoDB Atlas, you want to make sure you have your user set up. You want to make sure that your IP address has been added. You can also set it so that any IP address can connect. So next thing we're going to do is create our data model for our users. So with Mongoose and MongoDB, instead of setting this stuff up at the database level like you would with, let's say, MySQL or Postgres, you do it within your application. And in our backend, we're going to have a folder called models. And this wouldn't just be for users. Like in the commerce course, we have a model for products, we have a model for orders, and so on. So let's call this user model.js. And a model consists of a schema, which is going to basically just the fields that that piece of data will have. So like name, email, password. So let's import Mongoose, and then let's create our schema. So we'll say const user schema, and we're going to set that equal to mongoose dot uppercase s schema. And then inside that, we pass in an object with our fields. So we're going to have a name. Did I do that right? Schema. Yeah, so we're going to have a name. Now, you can just do like this, name string, but if you want to have other things, like if it's required or not, then you can make this an object. So in an object, then we'll say type, and the type will be a string. And then I also want it to be required, so we'll say required is going to be true. And then we'll just copy this down 2 more times. So we have name, we have email, type is going to be string, required true. And I also want this to be unique. No one should have the same email address, so we'll say unique and set that to true. And then for the password, obviously it'll be a hash password, but it's still going to be a string, and we want that to be true. Now, I also want timestamps, meaning if a user is added, I want the date, the create date, and if it's updated, I want the updated at field. So instead of manually adding them, we can go past this last curly brace here and put a comma, and then open up another set of curly braces, and we can say timestamp and set that to true. Timestamps, plural. And that should do it. Now we're just going to create a variable here called user and set that to mongoose.model, which takes in a model name, which we'll call user with an uppercase U, and then it takes in our schema, which is our user schema. And then we simply want to export as default that user model. So then we can bring it into our controller, and then we can call Mongoose model methods like find and save and all that stuff. All right, so we shouldn't, well, we'll go back into our model later when it comes to like hashing passwords and stuff like that, but we're good for now. And we can close this db.js, and we're going to go into our user controller. And then we're going to bring our user model in. So let's say import user uppercase U, and that's going to be from our model, which is going to be up 1 level into models and then user model.js. Now, I think the first thing we should do here is the register route, because right now we don't have a user to try to authenticate. So when we register, it's also going to authenticate. It's going to be very similar to auth user, except with register, we're creating a new user instead of, authenticating one. But ultimately, we're going to end up with the JSON Web Token in the HTTP only cookie. So let's go into register user, and we want to be able to get the body. So right now, I'm just going to leave this response. But we want to be able to get, let's just do a console log of request.body, because that is the data that's sent in the HTTP body. So the name, email, password, that stuff will be here. However, right now, if I try to console log that and I go to my register route and I send and we look down in the console, you'll see it's undefined. That's because to use this, we need to add the middleware, the body parser middleware. So let's go into our server.js, and we're going to add that right here. Let's say app.use, and we're going to do express.json. So that will allow us to parse just raw JSON. And then I also want to add app.use and then express.url encoded. And that's just going to take in an object with extended and set that to true. So that will allow us to send form data as well. All right, now if we go back to, let's go back to Postman and send that again, and then we come down here and look, you'll see we just get an empty object. Now to send body data, we can go right here into body, and let me just make this a little bigger so that we can see, so we can see those. And we can choose to send raw JSON or this form URL encoded, which is what I'm going to do. So for the key, I'm going to send name, and we'll say John Doe. And if I send, and then I look at my console, you'll see I have an object with the name of John Doe. Now, if I want to get that value, I could destructure it. So I could say const, open up some curly braces, say name, and then set that to request.body, and that will pull that out. So now if I were to send again and look at the console, we should probably console log it, that would help. So console log name, and then send it again, check it out, and we get John Doe. All right, now we want to be able to take in the name. We also want email, and we want password. All right, because we're registering a new user, and that's what we want to get. So let's get rid of that console log, and then the first thing I want to do after we get that data from the body is see if the user exists. So we'll say const user exists, and we're going to set that to await, because remember all these model methods, they return a promise, so we're using async await, and then user, and there's a method called find one. And basically what that'll do is just find a single user by whatever I put in here, and I want to get it by email. And this is the same as doing this. Okay, so I'm basically just saying if the email matches this email that's being sent. But we can cut that down to just email. All right, so if that user exists, let's say if the user exists, then I want to throw an error. So remember, we can set the status. Status is going to be 400, which is a client error. And then we can say throw new error. And then just say user already exists. Okay, and this will use our default error handler that we created a little while ago. So outside of that if statement now, we want to create the user, because obviously they don't exist if they're passing this validation. So let's say const user, set that to await, and then user.create. And we're going to pass in here, we want the name, the email, and the password. And you're probably saying, well, that password is just plain text. It is. So after we do this, we're going to go into the model, and we're basically going to add a little hook that says before we save this password, we want to hash it using bcrypt. Okay, and we'll do that in a second. But let's go down here after we create that user, and we'll check to make sure the user was created. And then we want to do res.status, and let's do a 201, which is successful, but something was created. And then JSON, and in here we'll pass an object that has the user, say underscore ID, set that to the user dot underscore ID, and the name, so user dot name, and the email, which will be the user dot email. Okay, we're not sending the token. I know that in some tutorials you'll see where they send the token, but we're not doing it that way. We're still going to store the token in an HTTP only cookie. All right, now if there's no user here, so if something goes wrong, then we're just going to say else, and let's set a status, so res status of 400, and then we'll throw a new error, and we'll just say invalid user data. Okay, and then this very last, this right here, we want to get rid of that. All right. Now I'm going to save this, and before we try it out, we want to make sure that we hash the password. Now you could bring bcrypt into the controller and do it here, but I think it's neater to keep it in the model and try and keep your controllers really light. So let's go into the user model, and first of all we're going to import bcrypt. So let's say import bcrypt from, and then it's going to be bcrypt.js. Okay, and then down here under the schema, we're going to add a piece of middleware. So we can actually add onto user schema, there's hooks for pre and post. So pre means obviously before. So we want to say before we save, then we want to run a function. Now this function, we're not going to use an arrow because of how the this keyword works, because we will be using this. So we're going to say async and then function, and that takes in a param of next because this is middleware, so you want to be able to move to the next piece of middleware. Now inside here, what I'm going to do is have an if statement, and like I said, we're going to use the this keyword, and this just pertains to the user we're saving, right? So in our controller, when we say user.create or user.save, that is what this means. Okay, so I'm going to say actually if not this, and on this we have certain methods, and one of them is modified. So I'm going to say if this, that should be a dot. So if this dot is modified, and then we can pass a field in here, we want to check for the password. So basically if the password isn't changed in any way, then we just want to move on. So we're just going to say next. Okay, if the password is modified, or if we're just creating it like we are now, then we want to hash it. So first thing, we have to create a salt, which is like a key that we use to hash the password. And we can create this with, let's say, await, and then bcrypt has a method called gen_salt. So generate salt, and it takes in the number of rounds, which is basically the number of characters, and I think it can be like 1 to 20 or something like that. So we're going to say 10, which is right in the middle, and then we can then say this dot password, because you can access any of the fields. Right now this dot password is just plain text, so that's why we're now changing it to be hashed, and we can do that with bcrypt dot hash, pass in the plain text password, which is this dot password, and also the salt. So that will hash the password before it's saved into the database. So we'll go ahead and save the file, and now we should be able to try this out. So let's go into Postman, go to our register route, and in the body, I'm going to have name, which I'll say John Doe. We're going to have email, which I'll do john@email.com, and then password, which I'm just going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but it should get hashed because of that middleware in the model. So let's say send, and we get back a 201 created, and it gives us the ID, the name, and the email. All right, now to check this, if you have Compass installed, you can use that. Now you do have to just reload, so you guys can't see my context, my menu, but I'm going to go to view and reload data. And there it is, there's my user. And you can see the password is hashed. And we also have created at and updated at because of that timestamps that we put in the model. All right, so we're now able to register users. Now, that's only half the battle. We also want to generate a JSON web token and also save that in an HTTP only cookie. So to do that, let's go to our register user. And we could put all the code here to generate the token and so on, but we're going to be doing the same thing in the auth route. So I'm going to put it in a separate utility file. So in Backend, let's create a folder called utils. And then in utils, we'll create a new file, and let's call it generate token.js. Okay, and in here, we want to bring in our JSON web token. So we import JWT from JSON web token, And then we're going to create a function here. So const, we'll call it generate token, and make it an arrow function. And this is going to take in two things. It's going to take in the response, and then it's going to take in the user ID. Now, the way that JSON Web Tokens work is you can add something into the payload, right? And what we want to add is the user ID, because we need that when we validate the token, right? We need to be able to pull that user ID out so that we can do whatever. If we're getting the user's profile or whatever it is, we need that user ID. So we're going to add that as a payload. So let's go ahead and create, let's say, token. And the way we create a token is use our JWT package, and there's a method called sign. And then sign is going to take in an object with the payload, which for us is going to be the user ID that's passed in. All right, then the second thing we want to pass in here is the secret, which we're actually going to put into our .env file. So let's say process.env dot, and then JWT underscore secret, and we'll add that in a second. And then the next thing, so another comma, the next thing is an object where you can have some options, and the option I want is expires in. So you can decide when you want this token to expire. I'm just going to say 30 days to keep it simple. But of course, you could make it a lot sooner than that. You can make it a day or an hour, whatever you want. All right, now let's add this secret. So I'm going to go to my .env, and let's say JWT underscore secret. And I'm just going to set it to ABC123, but of course you can set it to whatever you'd like. All right, so that will create the token. Now we need to save it in a cookie. So to do that, let's go under where we created the token, and we're going to say res.cookie, and we're going to call it JWT. Okay, and then we want to pass in the token. That's the data that goes in the cookie, and then we also have some options. So we want to pass in some curly braces. We're going to set HTTP only to true, and we're going to set secure. So basically with secure, the site has to be HTTPS. Now we only want this in production because obviously when we're in development, we're not using HTTPS on our local host. So what we can do is we can say process.env, and we're going to check our node underscore env and say if that is not equal to development. Okay, so if we're in development, then this will be false. If we're not in development and we're in production, then secure will be true. And then we're also going to add same site. So basically this will prevent CSRF attacks. We're going to set this to strict. And then we want to put a max age. So basically, when does this expire? I'm going to set it to the same thing as the token, which is going to be 30 days. Now, this takes in seconds. You can't use something easy like this, 30D. So we're going to do 30 times 24 hours in a day, and then times 60 minutes in an hour times 60 seconds, and then times 1,000. I think that's right. Yeah, so that should be 30 days. And then we're going to export this as default, generate token. Okay, so now we should be able to use this in our controller. So I'm going to close that up, and then we're going to import it at the top here. So let's say import generate token, and that's going to be from, and we want to go outside of controllers into utils and generate token. Make sure you add the .js. So now we just need to go down and add this, and let's see, we're gonna put it right before we put our response right here. We're gonna call generate token. Now remember, it takes in the response, so res, and the reason we do that is because we set the cookie with res.cookie, right? And then the second thing is the user ID, which we're getting the user here, right? So it creates the user and then it puts the result in user. So we should be able to just pass in user._ID. And that should do it. So we'll save that. Now let's check it out. So I'm going to go to Postman and I'm just going to, actually, you know what? I'm going to go through Compass and delete the user I just created just so I don't add up a bunch of users here. And then I'm going to go ahead and send this again and register John Doe. And now notice that where we have this cookies, we have 1 in parentheses. And if I click on that, it shows we have this JWT cookie, which is set to true for HTTP only. False is set to secure. Secure is set to false because we're not using HTTPS because we're in development. But this is how you can tell that the cookie was set. Also, if you click right here, you'll see JWT. And if I delete that, then that cookie will go away. All right, but that essentially means we're logged in if that cookie is set with the JWT value, which is this right here. Now, we don't have a logout yet, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete the cookie right now. So right here, I'll hit the X, and it should be gone. It does still show right here, but I just want to show you if I were to send this again, you'll see the cookies, that 1 is gone. But if I look in the body, it says user already exists because I'm trying to register someone with the same email. All right, and it's formatted as our error handler, our custom error handler wants, which is the message and stack if we're in development. So now let's create the login route, the auth route, and I'm just going to save this route. So if I click save, it'll actually keep this data in here. So I want to be able to log in now with John because right now I'm logged out. I got rid of the cookie. So let's go back into the controller and let's go up to the auth user function. And this is going to be really simple now that you understand what we've done here as far as sending back the user and generating the token and storing it. And we'll create the middleware that validates that token after we do this. So let's get from the body email and password because we have to validate that, right, to authenticate. So we want to set that to request.body. And we want to get that user with that email. So let's say user equals await, and then our user model, we can use find one, and we want to find the user by email. Okay, and then we're going to check for the user, and I'm just going to grab this right here because we're doing the same thing. So after we get the user, we're going to check for it. If it's not there, then since they're trying to log in, then we're going to do a 401, which is unauthorized, and we're going to say invalid, let's say invalid email or password. You don't want to let them know which one is which. Like, you don't want them to be able to validate to see if a certain email exists. So even if the email does exist, it's going to say invalid email or password. So obviously this is not checking for the password. We're actually going to do that in the model. So in user model, let's open that up, and we're going to, let's see, we already brought in bcrypt, and what we need to do is match the password that's sent, which is obviously going to be plain text. We have to match that to the hashed password. So bcrypt has a method called compare that allows us to do that. So what I'm going to do is on the user schema, we can say .methods. So we can add methods directly to the user in this case. And I want to call this match passwords. And we're going to set that to an async. And we're going to use function here because, again, we're using this keyword. And what that's going to take in is the entered, let's say entered password, which is going to be the plain text password. And then we're going to return await and then bcrypt dot. And then, like I said, there's a compare method. So this will return true or false based on if the entered password matches this dot password, which is the hashed password that's in the database. So if these match, then it's going to return true. If they don't, it's going to return false. So now let's save that, and let's go back to the controller. And in addition to checking for the user, we're going to say and then I'll just put some parentheses here, and we'll say await on the user itself. We can then call match password, which is the function or the method that we just added. And we're going to pass in password, which is the plain text password. Okay, so this right here is going to call this. It's going to take in the entered password, match them, return true or false. So now we're checking for both the email and the password. So let's save that and then make sure the user model is saved as well. And we can open up Postman and let's go to our auth. And if I just send it as is, I get invalid email or password. So if I go to my body and I go and add email, let's say john@email.com, and then password, and I'm going to put the wrong password in. I'm going to do 1 through 5 and send. Okay, so looks like we got an issue here. User match password is not a function. So what did I do? Await user match password. If we look at our model, we have, oh, I put passwords. Let's do just singular match password. All right, let's try that again. Okay, so now we get invalid email or password. Now let's go ahead and do the right password and send. And now we're authenticating. You can tell because of the cookie right here, right? We have our JWT cookie, and if you click right here, you can see it as well. All right, cool. Now we want to be able to log out, which means destroying that cookie. So instead of going to cookies and Xing this out, I want to have a route to do that. So let's go back into our controller here, and we're going to create a logout user. Where's our controller? We actually already have the function, so we're just going to add the functionality, which is actually really simple. So we can leave that. And the way that we can destroy this is by saying res.cookie, and we want the name of the cookie, which is JWT. And you could call it anything. If you want to call it token or whatever, that's fine. We're going to set it to nothing. And then in the options, we're going to still set HTTP only to true. And then for the expires, we're going to set that to new date and then 0. So it's just going to expire right away. And then we'll keep this status here, but let's change the method to, we'll say logged, or yeah, we'll say user logged out. Okay, so let's save that one and let's go back to Postman. I already have a logout route. So if we open this up and then I click send, we get user logged out. And now if we look in cookies, you can see there's no JWT. Okay, if I come over here, you can still see it here, but if we look in cookies here, it's not there. So we're now logged out. So now that we're able to register, log in, and log out, we need to now be able to actually protect our routes, because right now it's kind of useless, right? It's just setting the cookie. We need to do something with that cookie. So that's where the auth middleware comes in. So in the middleware folder, let's create a file called auth middleware.js. Now in this file, we're going to need to check the cookie. We're going to need to parse the cookie, which we're going to use the cookie parser package for, which you should already have installed, as you can see here in package.json. And there's just a one line of middleware we need to add in the server.js to be able to do that. So first off, let's import the cookie parser. So we're going to import cookie parser, and then I'm going to add the middleware right here. We'll say app.use, and we're just going to pass in here cookie parser. Make sure you add your parentheses as well. Okay, so now we close that up, close the model up, and now in auth middleware, we're going to bring a couple things in. First off is the JSON web token, because we need to get the payload from the token, which is the user ID. So there's a method called verify that will verify the token and enable us to get the decoded, the payload information. And then we're also going to use the async handler. So let's bring that in from express async handler. And let's also bring in the user model. So that's going to be from /models/user model. Make sure you add the .js. All right, so we're going to have one function in here called protect, because that's what this is going to do. It's going to protect routes so that you have to be logged in to access that route. So this is going to be wrapped in the async handler. So let's add that first. And then in here, we're going to have an async function, arrow function. Okay, and this is going to take in request, response, and next, because it is, oops, these should be commas, because this is middleware, so we need to call next when we're done. Now, I'm going to initialize a variable called token, and then we're going to set token to request.cookies, and then the name of the token, which I called JWT. So just make sure if you called it something different, you put that here. And this, we're allowed to do this because of the cookie parser. If you don't have that installed and set up, then you wouldn't be able to use this. So that will get the token. So we want to check for the token, right? So basically we're checking for the cookie. So if it's there, then actually let's add our else first, because this is pretty simple. We're just going to return a status of 401, which is unauthorized, and then we'll throw an error. Okay, so throw new error, and let's say not authorized, and I'm just going to say no token. All right, now inside here, I'm just going to use a try catch, and in this error, I'm going to say res.status 401, and we're also going to have an error that says not authorized, but I'm going to say instead of no token, I'm going to say invalid token. Okay, because here it is there, the token's there, it's just not valid. Now in the try, let's go ahead and create a variable called decoded, and we can set that to our JWT verify method, and that takes in the actual token that we're getting from the cookie, and it also takes in the secret. So we want to do process.env.jwt_secret. Now that decoded object should have the user ID in it. So what we want to do, the ultimate goal here is to set request.user to the user of the token, because this request.user we can access from any route. So requests here, any of these, we should be able to say request.user, and that will be whatever user is logged in. And you can, do whatever you want from there, whether you want to fetch their products or orders or whatever it is you want to do. Get their profile. So let's do await, and then with the user model, we can say find by ID, and that ID is going to be in that decoded object. So decoded.userID, right? And the reason it's there is because when we generated the token, we called this sign method, we passed in the user ID. And you can pass anything you want in here as a payload and then access it from here. Now, this will get us the user, but it will also include the password. And even though it's hashed, I still don't want to return it. So we're going to add on .select and then pass in a string of -password, and that will make it so the password doesn't get returned. And then we just simply want to call next. Okay, and that's it. So now down here, we just want to export the protect middleware. And I'm not going to export as default because you might want to add in some other authentication middleware. Like for instance, in the e-commerce course, we have an admin middleware to check to see if the user is admin, because some routes you might only want admins or some other role to access. So to use this, let's go, actually before we use it, I just want to show you, if we go to get user profile and I send, and I'm not logged in right now, if I go to cookies, there's no JWT. I'm not logged in, but I can still access this route. So what I want to do is protect this route and the update route. So let's go to the user routes file. And what we're going to do is bring in the protect middleware. So let's say import protect from our auth middleware. And if we want to use it, we simply add it as a first argument. So right here, where we have our get request to get the user profile, I'm going to add in protect as the first argument. Same thing with the update. So right here, we'll say protect. Save that. Now let's go back over here, and I'm going to try to access this, and it says not authorized, no token. If I go to my update and I send not authorized, no token. So now if I log in, right, I'm going to go to login user. I have the correct info in here, email, password. I'm going to send. Now I'm logged in, meaning that cookie is there. So if I go back to get user profile and send, it works because that auth middleware, it goes through that first and it checks to see, is there a token? Does that JWT in the token, is it the right one? Is it verified? If it is, then we can go ahead and get the user. Now, not only that did we protect it, but if we go into our controller, into our get user profile, we have access to that user through request.user. So let's say you have a get orders function, right? And you want to get just the logged in user's orders, you can just simply add in request.user._ID into a query. So what I want to do here is just, let's say const user. I don't want to return request.user directly because there might be some fields that I don't want, even though the password isn't being returned. Actually, let me just show you what it does return. So we'll do a console log of request.user, and then let's go and hit that route, get user profile, and then we'll come back over here, and you can see this is what it gives me, the ID, name, email, created at, updated at, version. So the password is not here. So I could just return that, but what I'd rather do is just construct, let's say user equals, and we'll say _ID, or you could just do ID. Depends on how you want to set your application up. But let's say request.user._ID, and then name, request.user.name, and then email, request.user. Okay, and then I just want to return that. So right here, let's get rid of this message and say JSON, and then we want to just pass in our user. So let's save and go back, send, and now we're able to get our user data through this route. And of course, if I log out, go ahead and log out, and then I go back to my get user profile route and I try it, can't do it because I don't have the token. All right, so the very last thing we need to do in the back end, I shouldn't say the very last, but the last before we move on, is the update, right? We want to be able to update a user. So let's log back in, and now I should be able to access this put request, this update route, which right now is just returning a string, but we're going to go ahead and change that now. Now the first thing I'm going to do in this function is get the user, and I know we have the user in request.user, but we don't have the password, and I want to be able to update that. So we're going to say user equals await, and then user.find by ID, and pass in here the request.user._ID. Okay, and then we're going to check for that user. So say if that user, and else if it's not there, then we'll do res.status 404, and then let's throw new error, and we'll just say user not found. All right, now inside here, what I'm going to do is say the user.name equals the request.body.name or user.name, because if that name isn't included in the body, then I just want to have it, stay what it is. and we'll say that for email as well. So email, okay. And then let's check for the password. Now you might not want to have them update their password here, or you might, it's really up to you, but I'm going to choose to let them. So we'll say request dot, if request dot body dot password, then let's set the user dot password to request body password. Now we're going to save the user, so we want to await user.save, and that will save it with the new data, but I do want to get that new data to respond with it. So let's put it in a variable. So we'll say const updated user and set that to the whatever the save gives us, which will be the user with the new data. And then we're going to respond, so res.status 200.json, and we'll pass in an object here with underscore ID, which will be the updated user dot underscore ID. Okay, and then we're going to do the name of the updated user and the email. And I think, yeah, that should do it. So let's save. Then we're going to go to Postman and go to our update user profile and go to the body. And I'm just going to add, or I'm just going to change, let's do the email. So right now it's john@email.com, at least mine is. Yours might be different. But I'm going to change it to john, let's say, @gmail.com. And then I'm going to send. And now I get back the new user, john@gmail. Okay, and if I go to Compass and let's see, reload data, yeah, so it's changed in the database, john@gmail. To change the name, I could add on to this and say name, let's say John, I don't know, John James, and send that. Okay, get that back. Now remember, if you're going to log in again, you have to use the new email and the new password if you're going to change that. So let's try that too. So password, I'm going to change to 12345. All right, so now I'm going to log out, go to the logout, clear the cookie, and now, excuse me, I'm going to go back to the login, and I'm going to try to log in with the old info. It doesn't work. Now if I change it to john@gmail, let's see if that works. Nope, because I changed the password as well. So let's do 12345, and now I'm in. All right, cool. So our authentication, our backend API is completely working and all set. And you could use this with any front end. You know, if you want to use Vue or Svelte or build a mobile app or whatever, anything that can send HTTP requests, then you can use this API. All right, but we're going to start on the second part, which is going to be the front end of the application. Okay, so now we're going to start on the front end, and I just want to go over some of the tools that we'll be using. So as far as just a starting point, a boilerplate, we're going to be using Vite, which is a modern build tool, and I'm using it instead of Create React App. If you want to use Create React App, that's fine. That's actually what we used in the e-commerce course, but no matter which one you decide to use, once you get it set up, the rest of the code will be the same. So it's up to you on what you want to use. Vite is ultimately faster, and it's a more modern, it's not a module bundler. So, you know, it's not like Webpack or anything like that. It actually uses ES modules in the browser. So it's very, very quick. So that's what we'll be using as far as getting set up. Now, as far as state management goes, we're going to use Redux and Redux Toolkit. And Redux Toolkit just makes Redux easier and more enjoyable to work with. For those of you that have used just vanilla Redux, you know that it can get quite messy when you're, creating your actions and your reducers and all that, where Redux Toolkit basically puts everything into what we call a slice. And your slice holds your state, and your reducers for that particular resource, whether it's users, products, blog posts, whatever it might be. And then we're also using React Bootstrap for the UI. So basically we have all of our Bootstrap components, for example, buttons, we have available as React components. So we can just bring in a button, we can use it, and there's different props that we can pass in. So those are the three main things that we'll be using, but we'll have some small packages like React Toastify and some other things as well. So let's get started. I'm going to go back into my project here, and I stop my server, and I'm in the root. And what I'm going to do is run npm create, and then we're going to do vt at latest, and I'm going to put everything in a folder called Frontend. So basically, this is going to create our React application in a folder called Frontend. Let's say yes. Okay, now you're going to get some questions here. Let me just make this bigger. So Vite you can use with vanilla JavaScript, Vue, React, Preact, Lit, Svelte, and others. I'm going to choose React. And I'm not going to use TypeScript for this project, but you can if you want. So now what we need to do is cd into the front end, and we have to install our dependencies. So npm install or npm I. Now, it's really important to know where you're at in the terminal when you're installing stuff. Like, for instance, we're going to use React Router. You want to make sure you're not in the root because you don't want to install React Router on your server. So what I would recommend is having one terminal open. I'm just going to go back to the root for this. So this terminal is open in the root, and then I'm going to open up another bash terminal. And actually, no, I want ZSH. I'm going to open up another Z shell, and then this one I'm going to cd into front end. Okay, that way I have two terminals, one open in each. Now, as far as Vite goes, I'm going to do a little bit of customization. So I'm going to go in the config, and basically this is just, we're using the React plugin because we chose to use React, but I'm going to go under the plugins here, and we're going to put in a server object. And I'm going to set the port. The default, I believe, is like 5137. I like to set it to 3000. Of course, that's optional. And then we're also going to add a proxy because our API is on a different domain. It's on localhost 5000, where our dev server, our front-end server, is on localhost 3000. So when we make requests to our back end, I don't want to have to put, HTTP localhost 5000. So we're going to add a proxy here saying that whenever we go to anything that has /API, then we'll open up an object here. Then we're going to have a target, and that target is going to be HTTP localhost port 5000, which is our backend server. Okay, and then we're just going to add change origin and set that to true. So this is the same as if you use create React app and you add a proxy in the package.json file. Okay, so if you're using create React app, then you're going to want to do that. So that should be it as far as config goes. Now I want to be able to run the front-end React dev server from the root directory. So I'm going to go into my root package.json where we have our start and server. And let's add on to this a client script. And what this is going to do is run npm start. Is it npm start? I think, let's see, frontend package.json is, no, it's npm run dev. It's npm start if you're using create React app. So I want to do npm run dev and then just add the -- prefix and then front end because I want to run it in the front end folder. All right, now that will run the client. We can test that out. If we can go to the root and say npm run client. Okay, so that runs on, opens up 3000, good. So far so good. But I want to be able to run both the back end and the front end, so both of these scripts, without having to open up another terminal and run npm run server. So the way we can do that is with a package called concurrently. So in the back end here, or I should say in the root directory, let's npm install -D concurrently. And that will allow us to run both scripts. Again, make sure this is not in the front end. You want to install concurrently in the server, in the root. All right, so now what we'll do is create another script. So let's put a comma here, and I'm going to call this one dev, okay, because this is the main dev script. It's going to run both the client and server. So the way we do that is we say concurrently, and then I'm going to do slash, and then double quote, npm run server, and then slash, because I'm escaping the double quote here. And then I'm going to do another slash, backslash, and then double quote, and then npm run client, and then another backslash, double quote, and then a final closing double quote. So this is going to run both of these, the front end and the back end. So now when we want to run our development environment, we simply do npm run dev. And you can see port 5000, the server's running and the front end is running. So I can go to 3000, that's our front end, and I should still be able to go, let's see, we can go to Postman, and I should still be able to, authenticate, and I should still be able to use the API here as well. All right, so now we'll start to do a little bit of cleanup. Now with Vite, there's not that much to clean up. So if we look in the source folder, this is obviously where all of our components and stuff go. All I'm going to get rid of is the app CSS. So we can get rid of that. And we can go into our, let's see, we have our main.jsx and our app.jsx. The main JSX we can leave alone. And then the app.jsx, which is our main app component, all I'm going to do here is actually I'm going to get rid of everything and just do a simple arrow function component, and we'll just have a fragment here and then an h1, and we'll just say I don't know, we'll just say my app. And then I also want to go into the index.html and just change the title here to MERN Auth. Actually, we'll just change this to MERN Auth as well. So now if we go back to our localhost 3000, we can see this. Now we do have some CSS from this index CSS. I'm just going to clear all that out because we're going to be using Bootstrap. So I'll clear that out, and you should just see this for now. And we'll make this a little bit smaller. All right, so we now have just a brand new clean front end that we can start working on. Now, as I said, we'll be using React Bootstrap for the UI library, and you want to make sure you install this in the front end. So this terminal that's in the root, I have the server running, npm run dev, so I'm going to let that keep running, and I'm going to go into my front end terminal now. And from here, I'm going to say npm install react-bootstrap, and I'm also going to install react-icons so that we can use Font Awesome icons. So let's go ahead and install those. Again, make sure you're in your front end. All right, so now what we'll do is set up Bootstrap, which is pretty easy. We're just going to go into our front end entry point, which is main.jsx, and we're going to import the Bootstrap CSS. Right now we're importing our index CSS right here, which is completely empty. I don't want to delete it just in case you want to add some custom styles. But right above it, I'm going to say import, and we want to, let's see, we want to import bootstrap / dist / css / bootstrap.min.css. So if I do that, let's see. Got an error here. Failed to resolve import. Does the file exist? Oh, we need to install Bootstrap as well. So when you install React Bootstrap, you also need to install the actual Bootstrap package. That should fix that, hopefully. So let's reload, and there we go. And you can see that the font's different, the margin's different, so Bootstrap is now working. Now you can create your own custom themes. I actually used a custom theme for the e-commerce course, but for this, I'm just going to use the default styles, which is what this is. But if you want to compile your own Sass and create a custom Bootstrap file where you have custom colors and all that, that's fine. But that's not the focus of this tutorial. So this is going to look very bootstrappy. But again, if you want to customize it, you can certainly do that. So the first component we'll create is our header, because that's pretty simple. So let's go into source and let's create a folder called components. And this is for any components that are not pages or screens. We'll have a separate folder for our screens. But let's create in here a new file called header.jsx, or JS if you just want to use JS, or TS or TSX if you're using TypeScript. Now for something like this where it's just output, we're not really doing much here, I'm going to paste in the JSX and just go over it. So basically we're just bringing in a few components from React Bootstrap, the nav bar, nav, and container, and then a couple icons for the sign in and sign out links. And then in the header component where we have an HTML5 header, and then in that we have our nav bar, and you can pass in different props, like I want this to be dark, so I'm doing BG dark and variant dark. Expand is basically where you want the hamburger menu to kick in, so I'm saying on large screens. And then in the container here, we just have the navbar brand, which is kind of like the logo. I'm actually going to do MERN off, but of course you can put whatever you want there. And then we just have our navbar toggle and collapse, because we are using the hamburger menu. And then the nav with the nav links, which we have login. This should actually go to register. So we have login and /register, just have sign in and sign up for the text along with the icons. So you can just copy this, and you can copy it from the repository. Well, actually the repository will have other, the code, the final code, but you can copy it from the blog post. I'll have those in the description as well. So I'm going to save that, and then let's bring it into our app component. So in here, we're going to import the header, and I'm going to put it right above the H1. So now if we take a look, you can see we have our header here, our nav bar, sign in, goes to /login, which obviously these aren't going to, it's not doing much because we don't have those routes yet. We don't even have the router installed, but at least we have the nav bar there. And again, it looks very bootstrappy, but if you want to add your own custom theme, you can do that. We do have the hamburger menu working as well. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is we want to get the router set up, but let's create the home screen first, which is just basically the landing page. So in the source folder in the front end, let's create a new folder called screens. And in here, we're going to have a new file called HomeScreen.jsx. And I'm using the ES7 React Redux snippets extension, so I'll just say RAFCE, which will create an arrow function component. And just for now, I'm going to save this and bring it into the app folder. App file. So import home screen, and we'll replace the H1 with home screen. And we should just see the text home screen there. So in here, what I want to do is just render a component, a hero component, just an area, a showcase area with some text and also some buttons to the sign in and sign up page. So I could put it directly in the home screen, but I'm going to choose to put it into a component called hero.jsx. So let's create that. And for this, I think I'm just going to paste this in as well and just go over it. So again, we're just bringing in some stuff from React Bootstrap, container, card, and button. And we have some class names, like py5 is just padding on the y-axis, so basically top and bottom. And then we have a container. We have a card in that container with an H1, paragraph, and then we have the sign in and register buttons. Let's say sign in, and sign up. I mean, it doesn't really matter. This page is really irrelevant to what we're doing, but I just wanted to have something here. So let's save that, and then in the home screen, we'll go ahead and bring in that hero component. And then let's show that. We could even get rid of this div. We could just return the hero component. Okay, so there we go. We just have this little box, sign in, sign up. All right, good. So now what we can do is start working on the router, because obviously we have different pages we want, or different screens we want to be able to go to, like sign in, sign up, profile. So let's install the router. Now, again, make sure you're in your front end. You don't want to install the React router in your Express server. So make sure you're in the front end. Let's npm install react-router-dom. Now, there's also another package that we're going to want to install, because we're using React Bootstrap, and with the nav in the header, right, we have this nav link. So if we want to use the link component along with this nav link, then we need to use something called the link container, and that's part of a package called React Router Bootstrap. So we're also going to install React-Router-Bootstrap. So let's go ahead and get those installed. And we're going to set up our router first, and we're going to do that in the entry point, which is main.jsx. Now, if you're using Create React App, your entry point is called index.jsx. So you would go to that file. Now, there's a few things we're going to bring in from React Router DOM. So let's say import and open up some curly braces, and it's going to be from React Router DOM. So there's 4 things we want to bring in. The first is create browser router, and the next is create create routes from elements, and then we want to bring in, of course, the route component, and then the router provider. So router provider. So those are the 4 things we want. And then to create our router, let's come down here and we'll say const router. And we're going to set that to create browser router, which is then going to take in the create routes from elements. And then inside that, actually we don't want that there. So inside that create routes from element, we're going to have our route component with a path of / and then the element is going to be the app element. So in curly braces, we're going to put in app, and make sure you put in your angle brackets and all that. And then we're going to close that route. Oops, let's close this as well. Now every route we create now is going to go in here, because it's going to be a child of this route, which has the element of our main app component, which is being brought in here. Now, since we're putting the app component here, we don't want it down here. Instead, we want to put the router provider. So here we say router provider, and then we can pass in router equals and set that to our router variable above, which has all of our routes. Okay, now the only route we're going to have at the moment is the home screen. So let's import home screen, and then we're going to go in here and add that. So we'll say route path, and this is still going to be just / the index. And then as far as the element, it's going to be the home screen. Now, just make sure you don't do this where you just put, home screen. You have to have your angle brackets as well, because it has to be the actual component being embedded, just like we did with the app component. Now, since this is the home page or the index page, we're going to put index equals true. Okay, so we want to add that. And then any other routes we create, like our login screen, register screen, will go in here, just like this home screen. Now, to render whatever path we're on, whatever screen we're on, we need to go into our app.jsx, because right now we're just showing the home screen no matter what. So we can actually get rid of the home screen, and we want to import the outlet. So we're going to say import outlet from React Router DOM, and then we can come down here and replace that with outlet. And for now, we should see the same exact thing, because we're still seeing the home screen. That's the only, the only route we have. One thing I'm going to do is just wrap a container around the outlet. So I'm going to bring that in from React Bootstrap. So let's say import container from React Bootstrap, and then I'm going to go under the header and say container, and I'm going to give it a class name of my, so just margin on the y-axis of 2, and then I'm going to move the outlet into there. All right, cool. Now, before we move any further as far as screens and moving to the login and all that, we want to fix it so that these links up here aren't using href. I mean, obviously these routes aren't going to work right now, but you can see that when we click, you get the little refresh, little spinner in the tab, because it's going to a different page. Well, we don't want to do that because we have a single page application. All of the routes are embedded in our JavaScript. All the pages and screens are in our JavaScript. So we want to use the link component from React Router DOM. And if we're using, in the header, if we're using these nav links, then we want to use the link container from React Router Bootstrap. So let's go to the header and let's import, we want to import the link container, and that's going to be from React Router Bootstrap. Now, the way this works is wherever we want to have a link, like let's say right here, we have the navbar brand. We want that to go to the home screen or home page. So we'll get rid of the href, and we're just going to wrap this in the link container, and that's going to have a to attribute instead of a href. So we'll say to / and then we'll move the brand into that. And then we'll do the same thing down here. So instead of having the href on these nav links, we'll get rid of that, and we're going to wrap the whole nav link with the link container. And that's going to have to, and that's going to go to /login. And what we'll do is move this, the whole nav link, into that link container. Right? And then we'll do the same thing with the register. So we'll get rid of this href. And then let's go right here. And we just want to wrap this and change this to register. All right, so if I save that, we come over here, this should still take us to /login and /register, except now it's not a hard refresh. Now we also have these buttons which are using, let's see, that's in the hero component. So let's bring the link container in here as well. So import link container, and then we don't want these hrefs on these buttons. So get those out of there, and then we're going to wrap the button in the link container, and let's have this go to /login. And then we're going to move that button into there, and then we'll do the same thing for this button, except that's going to go to register. And then we're going to move this into here. All right, let's make sure that works. Okay, that brings us to login, that brings us to register. So now we have the navigation all set. So we're going to start on our forms now for the sign in and sign up. And we'll do the sign in or the login first. And the forms are going to be a little different. They're going to have a different layout where they're a little more narrow. They have a more narrow container. So I'm actually going to create a form container component to wrap both of those forms and the update profile form when we get to that. So in components, let's create a new component called form container.jsx, and we'll say RAFCE. Okay, so we have our form container. I'm going to bring in some stuff from React Bootstrap. So I'm going to bring in the container, and I'm also going to bring in the row and call. So row and column, and that's going to be from React Bootstrap. Now this form container, it's going to wrap our login and register form and update profile form. So it's going to take in a prop of children, because whatever we wrap, we want it to display in here. All right, so the outer element is going to be the container. So let's add that. And then inside of that container is going to be a row. Okay, and that row, I'm going to give that a class name of justify, let's say justify dash content dash MD, so on medium screens, center, and then also margin top 5. And then in that row, let's have a call. Yeah, so we'll have a call, and I'm going to add a couple props here. So we're going to do XS, so extra small. When the screen is extra small, I want the column to take up all 12 slices, basically. All right, so I'm going to put 12 here, meaning it's going to stack if it's extra small. If it's on medium screens, then I only want it to take up 6 of the 12 slices, so it'll be half. And then I'm just going to add a class name of card and also padding 5. And then in here, we'll just have the children, so basically whatever we wrap, in our case, it's going to be the forms. So let's save that, and now we can create our login screen. So I'm going to close up everything here, just because this is getting kind of messy. And let's go into screens. Let's create a file here called loginscreen.jsx. And before we start working with state and start making our requests and all that, I just want to have the register and login screens. I just want to render them on the page and have our local state, just our email and password state for the form and all that. So first off, let's import use state, since we're going to have local component state, and that's going to be from React. And then let's import, we want link from React router, because we're going to have a link to the register page, and then on the register we'll have a link to the login page. And then as far as React Bootstrap stuff, we're going to bring in form, button, row, and call. So that's going to be from React Bootstrap. And then we also want the form container that we just created. So form container, and that's going to be from, let's see, we're going to go /components/form container. All right, and then let's create a component here called login screen, and I want to create the state first. So let's go up here, let's say const, and we're going to have email, and then set email is going to be the function to manipulate that state. Set that to use state, and then the default for that is just going to be an empty string. Then we're going to have set password and password, because this is the login, so we don't need name here. It's not the register form. And we might as well just create our submit handler for now. So let's say submit handler, and that's going to be, it's actually going to be an async function. Pass in our event parameter, and just for now we're going to e.prevent default, and we'll just do a console log of submit just for now. So now let's do the form output. So the wrapper for these forms is going to be our form container. Okay, so that's going to be the outer wrapper. Then we'll have an h1, let's say sign in, and under that h1 will be our form. And our form is going to have a submit handler. So let's say on submit, set that to the submit handler. And then inside the form, we're going to have a group for each input. So let's say form.group, and I'm going to give this a class name of my2, give it some margin, and it's going to have a control ID, and set that to email, because this is for the email field. Now in the group we have a label, so form.label, and that's going to be email address. Okay, under the label we're going to have the actual input, which is a form.control in React Bootstrap. and that's going to actually take in some props. So I'm going to go in here, and we're going to add a type. Type is going to be email, and we're going to add a placeholder, and that will be, let's say, enter email. And then we're going to have a value, which is going to be the email state, and then we'll have an on change. So basically, when we type into this field, this function is going to fire off. So we're going to have an arrow function with an event parameter, and then we're just going to call set email, because this is going to update that state with whatever we type in. So we pass in here e.target.value. All right, so that's the first input. Then I'm going to copy this form group, and then right under it, let's paste that in, and now we want the password. So I'm going to change the ID here. Actually, I'm going to change all of these instances of email to password, except, of course, we don't want password address. I actually did that in another tutorial. I forgot, and I left it as password address. Type password, enter password, except I'll make that uppercase, and then set password. This should also be uppercase. All right, then we want our button. So under the form group, let's say button, and we'll say sign in, but I just want to add a couple props to this button. So one is going to be the type, and we want to set that to submit, and then the variant, I'm going to set that to primary, and then class name, I'm just going to do some margin on the top. Now underneath that, I want just an area where it says if you're a new customer, then they'll have a link to register. So I'm going to put that into a row, and this row is going to have a class name of py-3, just some padding, and then inside there we'll have our call, and inside the column we'll say new customer with a question mark, and then a link, and that link is going to be to what is this going to be to? This is going to be to register, right? Because if they're a new customer, then they need to register, and we'll just put in the text here, register. Okay, so obviously this isn't going to do anything yet. It's just going to log submit, but at least we have the UI. So let's go ahead and now create a route for this. So we're going to go back to our main.jsx where we have our routes, and we're going to import the login screen. And then down here, I'll just copy this down, except of course we want to get rid of the index true because it's not the index. And then the path is going to be /login, and the element that we want to show on that route is going to be the login screen. So now let's save that, and let's click on sign in, and it takes us to /login, and we can see our form UI. Now for the register screen, let's do that, because I just want to get the output, the UI there before we start looking at state and functionality and requests. So I'm going to just copy everything from the login screen because it's very similar, and then let's create a register screen. So register screen.jsx, and we'll paste that in, and just be sure that you change here this login screen, and then down at the bottom change that to register screen. And then we have a couple changes that that we need to make here. So in addition to email and password, we're going to want the name, right? So let's change this to name, and this is going to be set name. And then I also want a confirm password, so I'm going to copy this down, and this is going to be called confirm password, and then this will be set confirm password. Okay, and then let's see, submit handler, we'll just leave that for now. Let's change this to sign up instead of sign in. And let's see, we have our email here. I'm going to copy this email form group, and then right above it, we'll go ahead and paste that in, and this will be for the name. So I'll just change all this stuff to name. Get rid of that, make this uppercase. Type, there is no name type. Let's make that text. And we'll say enter name, and then set name, that should be uppercase. and we should be good there. Now we just want to do the confirm password, so I'll copy the password form group, and we'll change the control ID to confirm password, and let's change the label here to confirm. The type will be password. Here we'll say, instead of enter, we'll say confirm, and then the state is going to be confirm password, and then set confirm password. Now down here, let's change sign in to sign up, and let's also change right here where it says new customer, let's change that text to say already have an account, or let's not do uppercase, we'll say, so already have an account, and then this is going to go to login, and we'll change that to login. All right, so that's our register screen. So let's go back to main JSX and let's import the register screen, and then we can add that route down here. Let's change this element to register screen and change the path to /register. So now I should be able to click on sign up, and it takes me to the sign up UI, the sign up form. So now we're going to get into our global state, and again we're going to be using Redux Toolkit, and they have guides here, they have tutorials if you want to use this as kind of a supplement, but basically it makes Redux easier, and it makes us not have to write as much boilerplate. We don't have to create like our custom actions to make our requests and all that. It's as simple as creating a slice, and then for any requests we want to make, we just add an endpoint. All right, there is a little bit of setup, but not as bad as if you were using just vanilla Redux. Now, I definitely would suggest that you use the Redux dev tools. So whether you're using Chrome or Firefox, definitely get these installed because it helps you just see your state and see any actions that are fired off or anything like that. And I'm just going to close the rest of this stuff up. So let's install it first of all, and again, make sure you install it in your front end. I'm going to close these tabs up for now, and down here you can see I'm in my front end, and I'm going to run npm install and then @redux.js/toolkit, and then I'm also going to install the React Redux bridge, which is called react-redux. That just makes it so we can use Redux with React, because you can technically use Redux with anything, really, with vanilla JavaScript, with Angular, with anything. It just goes really good with React. All right, so now we have that installed. The first thing we're going to do is create our store, which is a place to hold all of our state. And then we can dispatch actions to change that state. We can also subscribe to that store to get the current state. So in the front end folder, in the source folder, let's create a file called store.js. And the way we're going to set this up is we're going to import something called configure store, and that's going to be from Redux Toolkit, so @redux.js/toolkit. And then the way we do this is we create a variable called store, set that to our configure store, and then that takes in an object, and that object we're going to have a reducer object, and this is where we put our reducers. Right now we don't have any, so we're just going to keep it empty. And then we also have our middleware, which I'm going to set that to an arrow function, and this will take in a function to get our default middleware. So it's called get default middleware, and then we just want to call that. So get default middleware like that, and then we'll do comma, and then dev tools. This is important because you want to be able to use the Redux dev tools, so you have to add this, dev tools true. All right, and then we want to just export as default our store, and then we can bring that into our main entry point, which is main.jsx. All right, so in main.jsx, we're going to bring in a couple things. Let's go right here, and let's say import store, and that's going to be from just /store store because that's in the same on the same level. And then we want to bring in our provider for Redux. So let's say import provider. Now the provider is actually from React Redux, which is the bridge. So React-Redux. All right. Then what we want to do is come down here where we have our router provider, which is essentially our app along with our routes, and we want to surround that with our provider. We'll surround the React strict mode as well. So right here, let's say provider, and then that's going to take in our store right here. So the store that we just created in the other file, and we want to wrap everything. So let's go down here and put our ending tag. So now our store is there and it's implemented with our app. We can open up our dev tools. And if you go to your console, you're going to see that we don't have a valid reducer yet because we haven't created any reducers, so that's fine. And if you go to Redux, at least you're not going to see anything here yet in our state because we have nothing. We have no reducers. There's nothing in our state, but this does work. So we do have this working. So the next thing we want to do is create a slice. Now the way that this application is going to work is we're going to have two slices, and a slice is just where you can keep certain pieces of state as well as your reducers that take in actions. And we're going to have two different slices. One is going to be called Auth Slice, and it's going to just be dealing with local stuff. So it's going to take the user data that we get back from our API and put it in local storage and also put it in our auth state. So it'll have the ID, the email, and the name, right? Not the token. Remember, the token is stored in an HTTP-only cookie. It'll also have the logout where it will destroy it from local storage. But that's really it for the auth state. The other slice we're going to have is the user API slice, and that's where we actually make the request to the backend to log in, to authenticate, where we register, where we get our profile, where we update our profile. That stuff is going to go through the user API slice. All right, so let's start with the auth slice, which again is just the local stuff. So we're going to create in source in our front end a folder called slices. And we're going to create a file called auth slice.js. Okay, and then we're going to add to this, or we're going to bring in create slice. Okay, and there's two different kinds of slices. There's one like this, which is just local stuff, and then there's an API slice where it implements the Redux Thunk middleware so that you can make asynchronous requests. And if you've ever done anything with vanilla Redux, you know that you need to set up that Thunk middleware manually. But here we don't. It's much, much easier, as you'll see. So let's say import create slice from, and then that's going to be from Redux Toolkit. And then we're going to create our initial state. And basically, our initial state is going to check local storage. So this is going to be an object with user info. And for that user info, we first want to check local storage. So we're going to say get item, and that's going to be called user info. And we're going to use a ternary here because we're saying if that's there, then we want to use that. And we also want to parse it, JSON.parse, which will turn it into an actual JavaScript object rather than just a string. So we're going to pass in here local storage dot get item. Let's close that up. So get item and user info, else then this will be null. What did I mess something up here? So JSON.parse. Oh, wait a minute. User info, so after both of these, then we want to do else null. All right, so hopefully that's clear. We have our initial state, which is user info. It's going to check local storage for user info. If it's there, we're going to use that. We're going to parse it as well. And if it's not there, then user info is just going to be null. All right, so that's our initial state. Now down here, we're going to create our slice. So let's say const auth slice. and we're going to set that to create slice, which we just brought in, and that takes in an object with a name, which we're going to set to auth, and then it takes in our initial state, which we just set above, and then it also takes in reducers, which is going to be an object with reducer functions. And in this particular slice, we're going to have two functions: set credentials, which is going to set our user info to local storage, and logout, which is going to take our info out of local storage. So let's say set credentials, and all of these are going to take in state and an action. Okay, so this is going to be an arrow function that takes in state and action. Now, the action that we pass in is going to be the user data. So I'm going to say state dot user info. We're going to set that to the action dot payload. Okay, which is again going to be the user data, the name, email, and ID. And then we want to set that to local storage. So we're going to say set item. We want to set user info. And we just want to make sure we stringify it before we put it in. So JSON.stringify, and then pass in our action.payload. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. We're going to have an action, right? When we call this, we're going to pass the user in as the action, and then we're going to set it to our user info state, and we're going to save that also to local storage. And then we're going to have a log out. We probably should call this, well, I guess it doesn't matter, because we're going to have a logout in the user API slice that makes the request to the back end to log out. This is just basically the front end logout to kill the local storage. So you could call it like clear credentials, but I'll just keep it as logout. So for that, that's also going to take in state and action, right? And then we're going to say state.userinfo, and now we're clearing it. So we're going to set it to null. And then let's say local storage dot remove item, and we want to remove user info. Okay, so we're clearing it from both our state and local storage. Now we need to export a couple things here. One, we want to export as default the Auth Slice reducer. So we say Auth Slice and then dot reducer. But we also have actions, right? So when we call these, like if I call this in my login component, my login screen, it's an action. So right above that, we're also going to say export const, and then in curly braces, we're going to have our set credentials and logout. Okay, and then we say equal auth slice dot actions. So actions is when you call this, that's an action. When it changes your state, that's the reducer. So let's save that. Now in order to use this, in order to use any slice, you have to bring it into your store. So let's go to store.js, and up at the top here, we're going to import auth reducer, and that's going to be from /slices/auth slice. And then down here in reducer, we're going to say auth. That's going to be the name of this part of our state, and that's going to be set to our auth reducer. So let's save that. Now, let's see what's going on here. Initial state is not found. Oh, I spelled this wrong. Okay, so now let's take a look at our Redux Dev Tools and now see that we have auth in our state. And the reason it's called auth is because in our store, we called it auth, right? If I call this auth1 and we look now, this is called auth1. And then all we have in there is right now, actually I do have a user in there just because I already had that in this for localhost 3000. It's in my local storage. So let me just clear that. You guys won't have that. So I'm just going to clear it. I'll just, I'll clear all this out. So now if I go back to Redux, now my user info is null, which is what you guys should be. Okay, and then once we go through and we send our request to log in, we make it's successful, we get back a response, that user will then be put into this local store, into this state and into local storage. All right, so that's basically the local part of our state. Now we want to have the part of our state that makes asynchronous requests to our back end. So in slices, we're going to create another slice called API slice.js. Now this is going to actually implement the Thunk middleware, and we don't have to do it manually. Basically all we have to do here is bring in a couple things. We're going to bring in create API, and we're also going to bring in fetch base query, and that's going to be from Redux.js/toolkit, but you also want to do /query and then /react, because under the hood it uses RTK query, which is a library for interacting with the backend API, and the Thunk middleware is built in, so we don't have to manually add that either. But there is some setup here. There is some boilerplate. So first off, we're going to create a variable called base query. Set that to our fetch base query, and in that just takes an object with a base URL, and for us it's just going to be an empty string. Now if we didn't use a proxy, we would put like HTTP localhost 5000, because we would want that before every call, but for us we're just going to keep that as an empty string because we're using a proxy. And then we're going to export const API slice, and then set that to create API, which is going to take in an object with our base query. So base query, and then we also have a concept of tag types, and this has to do with caching, because sometimes you might have like blog posts and stuff where you don't want to make a fetch every single time. You want to cache them and use that data. So the only tag type we have is user. If we had products or blog posts or something like that, then we would add those as tag types. And then we also have endpoints, which is going to be just an arrow function, and this takes in a builder. So basically there's a built-in builder to make our requests. And when we make our request, it won't be from this file. You can think of this as like a parent to any other API slices. So for this particular application, we just have a user's API slice, but in the course project, we have a products API slice, an orders API slice, and a user's API slice. And all those have their own endpoints that contribute to the back end or interact with the back end. So let's save this. That's all we have to do here. And then we just want to bring it into our store. So in store.js, we're going to import Auth Slice. I'm sorry, not Auth Slice, API Slice. And that's going to be from, and then we want to go, let's see, /slices/API slice. And then to add it, let's go in the reducer object. And the way we add it is as an index, we do brackets API slice dot, and then reducer path, and then colon, and then API slice dot reducer. So what that will do, if I save that and now we take a look at our state, you can see we have this API, and this has a whole bunch of stuff associated with it. So queries, mutations, subscriptions. So it gives us a lot to work with without us having to do the extra work. And queries are basically, fetching data from the back end. If you're going to fetch your blog posts, products, whatever, that's going to be a query. Mutations are doing something in the back end, like adding a user, like when we register or log in. Those are going to be mutations. All right. So now that we have our API slice, we can close that up. We don't have to touch that again. We don't have to touch Actually, we do have to add the middleware because remember we have the thunk middleware. And basically all we have to do here is add on to this. So at the end of this get default middleware, we're going to concat. So let's just say .concat, and then we can pass in here API slice .middleware. And now we shouldn't have to touch this file again. All right, now we're going to have another file, another slice in here called users API slice.js. And this is where we'll have all of our endpoints to work with the back end. So we're going to import the API slice, because that's, like I said, you can think of that as like the parent slice to this. So that's going to be from ./API slice. And then let's create a variable for our user's URL. So underscore URL. You could put this in a separate constants file if you want. But since we only have one resource, which is users, so I'm just going to put it in here. And that's API/users, right? Because all of our backend endpoints start with API users. So let's go ahead and create our slice here. We're going to say export const and then users API slice, and set that equal to API slice, and then there's a method called inject endpoints. All right, so basically what this allows us to do is create our own endpoints in this file, and it'll inject them into the endpoints here. So we're using dependency injection. So in this inject endpoints, we're going to have an endpoints function, which also takes in builder. So we want an arrow function, pass in builder. We're going to set this to an object, so we want to have parentheses around our curly braces. And then in here, we can put all of our queries and mutations. So the first thing I want to do is the login. So I'm going to call this login. We're going to use the builder and create a mutation. And I know this might be really overwhelming if you've never used this before, but once you see the flow of this, once you see how we add the login and the register and the update profile and all that, you'll see how easy it is to add functionality once all this boilerplate crap is done. So for this mutation, we're just going to pass in an object, and it takes in a query. And that's going to be a function, and we're going to have data passed in because it's a login. So remember, we're going to be sending an email and password. That's going to be what that data is. And then we're going to set that to an object, so parentheses around our curly braces. And in here, we're going to have a URL that we want to hit, which is going to be our backend URL. So we're going to have users underscore URL, which is API/users. And then we're hitting the auth route, so we're going to put /auth. Because remember, what we're hitting is in our controller, the auth user, that's the route to this auth user, because this is what I'm hitting, right, from the front end, from this slice. So we have the URL. Now we do want to specify the method, because by default it will be a GET request. I want this to be a POST request. Okay, and then we also we need to send the body, which will be the data passed in. So now in our form, we just have to dispatch this login action, okay, or this endpoint. But we do have to export it, so let's come down here and say export. I'm going to say export const. Now there's a specific convention to export these mutations and queries. Since this is a mutation, right, we need to say use and then the name of it, so in this case login, and then mutation. Okay, so that's going to be the name of the mutation, and then we set that equal to user or users API slice. Okay, now if this were a query, like if we said builder query and we were fetching some data, then this would be use login query instead of use login mutation. So it's very important that you use the correct convention. So now we can save that, and now we can go back into our login screen and start to implement it. So let's go into login, and let's see, we're going to bring in a few more things. We do want a use effect, and then let's see, link. We're also going to navigate from, from this page. So I'm also going to bring in use navigate from React Router DOM. And then let's see, we have, we're going to need to dispatch an action, and we're going to need to get data from the state. We need to get our user data. So we're going to import two hooks from React Redux. So from React-Redux. And those two hooks are use dispatch and use selector. So use dispatch, obviously that's to dispatch an action, and then use selector is to select from your global state. Okay, then we want to bring in our mutation that we just created. So say use login mutation, that's going to be from our users API slice. And then I also want to bring in our set credentials from our auth slice, because after we hit our back end, we get our user data, we then want to call that set credentials. So let's say import set credentials from our auth slice. Okay, now for use navigate and use dispatch, we need to just initialize the variables for those. So I'll say const navigate equals use navigate, and then let's say const dispatch equals use dispatch. So we can use those functions. All right, now let's see, to get the function to call to fire off our mutation, what we'll do is say const and then in brackets and then set that to use login mutation. So in here, the first thing we're going to pass in is the name of the function to call, which I'm going to call login. You could actually call this anything. And then what's great about this is we can also, in curly braces, we can get is loading. So we don't have to handle the loading state, right? It's there just by default. We can also get the error if we want. So it's nice because you don't have to manually set all those parts of your state. Now to get the user data, we can use the use selector hook. So let's say const, and the state that we want is going to be the user info, which is, if we look in our auth slice, so right here, user info. So in our login screen, we can say user info and then set that to use selector. That's going to take in a function that takes in our state, and then we just set state dot and then whatever part of our state we want. So we want this right here, auth, because that's what has our user info. So we just simply do state dot auth. All right. Now, let's see. The next thing I want to do is, if there is user info, that means we're logged in. So I want to redirect to the home page if we're logged in and we go to the login screen. So for that, we'll do a use effect. So let's say use effect and pass in our function, and then we're going to say if user info, then we're going to navigate to the home screen. All right, and that's all we need in here. Now we do have to add those as dependencies to our use effect. So we want to add navigate and user info. All right, so if I just save this now, I just want to make sure that we don't have any issues here. Okay, so now the only thing left to do is to log in for our submit handler. We have login, and then we also have our set credentials that we brought in. So now let's go, let's see. Yeah, we'll just go down to our submit handler, get rid of this console log, and I'm going to do a try catch. And in the try, we're going to say const res, and then we want to await on login. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm calling this login, which is from our mutation, which is in our API slice right here. So that I'm going to make this request, this post request. So back in the login screen, let's say we're going to call login, and remember, it needs to take in the data of the username and password. So we're going to pass in an object with, I'm sorry, not username, email and password, which are coming from the form, right? And then we just want to add on the end of this dot unwrap, because this will return a promise. So what this basically does is it unwraps that promise. So that takes care of calling, to the back end. And the response from the back end is the user, which is going to be put into this res variable. So then what we want to do is then call set credentials, because remember, that will set it to local storage and to our state. So we want to then dispatch set credentials. And what I'm going to pass in here is just an object, and we're going to spread across that res data, which is the user data. So now we're just setting the user to local storage and to our state. And then finally we'll navigate to the home screen. All right, now if there's an error, so in the catch, I'm just going to do a console log of, I'm actually going to change this to just ERR, because we should be able to get ERR.data.message or ERR.error. All right, I'm just going to put question marks here just so if these, so we can still try to get this message even if these are undefined. So let's save that. Now we're going to try to log in with the wrong email and password, and I'm going to actually have the network tab open just so we can see exactly what happens. So I'm going to put in here john@email.com, which is not correct, and then 123456, which is not correct, and click sign in. And down here you'll see we got a 401 and it says invalid email or password. If we look in the console, let's see, this right here, reading icons, never mind that. That's just for my LastPass extension. You won't see that unless you have LastPass installed. In fact, I'm going to disable it in a second. But this is what we actually have coming from our app, is invalid email or password. That's coming from the catch from this console log. Okay, so let me just, let me disable LastPass real quick. That should make those go away. Yeah. So now if I send, so now just seeing invalid email or password. Now before I try an email and password that works, I just want to set up React Toastify, because obviously we want to show the user that they're not entering the correct information, and they're not going to check the console. So let's go to the front end and let's npm install react-toastify. And there's just a little bit of setup for this. So we have to go to our app.js, our app.jsx, and bring in the Toast container and the CSS for Toastify. So we're going to import Toast container, and that's going to be from React Toastify, and then right under that I'm going to import the CSS, which is in react-toastify /dist/react Toastify. I think that's it, right? Yeah, react-toastify.css. Otherwise, it will look really, really crazy. And then the Toast container, you can just put that anywhere. I'm going to put it right under the header. So Toast container, Toast container, just like that. All right, so now we should be able to bring in wherever we want. We should be able to bring in Toast, which is a function that we call, and that's from React Toastify. So now instead of a console log for my error, I'm going to change that to toast.error. So now instead of showing it in the console, you can see it shows it here in a toast. All right, so we know that the error works, right, if it's not correct. So now let's try the real login, which for me is John at Gmail, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'm going to sign in. And notice that I didn't get the message, and it brought me to the index page. Now you can see the HTTP only cookie if you go to application and then you go down to cookies, and right here you can see my JWT and HTTP only is checked. All right, so we have that set, and that's going to be sent with every request. So we don't have to worry about attaching the JWT to the request like you would have to do if you had it in local storage, which is really cool. Now, I do want to show if we're logged in or not, so we want to change this menu up to check for the user, and if there is a user, if we're logged in, then we want to show the user name along with a profile link. So what we'll do is go into our header, so components, header JSX. We can close up login screen. I believe we're done there. Main JSX, we can close that up for now. So in the header, we're going to bring in a couple more things from React Bootstrap because I do want to have a drop down. So we want, what is it, nav drop down and badge. And then let's see what else we want. We need to be able to get stuff from the state. So I'm going to import use selector, and then we're also going to need use dispatch because we're going to need to dispatch the logout. So I'll bring that in as well. And then let's see, I think that's all we need for right now. So let's come down here and go to, let's see, so we have our nav right here. So directly in the nav, I'm going to open up some curly braces and I'm going to check for the user info. Actually, before we do that, we need to get the user info. So in the component above the return, we'll say const user info. And we're going to get this the same way we got in the login screen. We say use selector, that takes in a function with the state. And then the part of the state we want this from is state.auth. So now down here, we're going to check for that user info. And if it's there, then we'll show something else. We'll show something else. Now the something else is these two link containers. So I'm going to cut those. And we do have to have a wrapper around those. So I'm going to go in the second set of parentheses and add a fragment. And then in that fragment, I'll add those link containers. And then in the first one here is where we want to put the drop down and the username. So we're going to actually wrap that in a fragment as well. And let's say nav drop down. We're going to give it a title. Title is going to be set to user info.name because that's what's going to be displayed. And I'll give it an ID of username. All right, now inside the drop down, we're going to have the link container for the profile. So let's say link container 2 and set that to /profile. And then in the link container, we're going to have a nav dropdown item. So nav dropdown dot item. And that's going to say profile. All right, then we're also going to have a logout. So under that dropdown item, after that link container, I'm going to do a nav dropdown dot item and say logout. Okay, and this will have a logout handler, but we'll add that after. So now if I save that, we take a look, it says John James. Okay, and then I have my profile, which obviously isn't going to work yet. Logout obviously isn't going to do anything either, but at least we can see that we're logged in. So now to do the logout, what we can do is go back to our user's API slice, and we can add a new mutation for a logout. So I'm going to go under the login, which ends right here, and you'll see the pattern, and you'll start to see that it's easy to add new functionality and new requests. So we're going to say builder dot mutation, and in here we're going to pass in, say, query. Actually, we want to set that to parentheses and then curly braces. So the URL for this is going to be the user's URL, slash logout. Okay, because we're hitting that endpoint, and we want it to be a post request. So let's say method and set that to post. Now we need to export this. So remember the convention, it's use logout mutation. Now I'm going to go back to the header, and I'm going to bring in that mutation, and I also want to bring in the logout from the Auth Slice, the local one, right? This logout, which just removes it from local storage. So let's say in the header, import, and we want use logout mutation, and then I'm also going to import logout from, let's see, where are we? Want to go up to slices slash, and then users, Auth Slice. Okay, and we want to call both of those in our handler. So let's go down to the logout, which is right here. So this navbar drop-down item, I'm going to say on click, and we'll set that to, let's say, logout handler. And then we'll go up here, we'll add that logout handler, and that's going to be asynchronous. Okay, and then we'll put that in a try catch. And what we're going to do here is await. Now, I haven't created the function to call for this mutation yet, so that's something we have to do. So let's say const, and in brackets, I'm going to call that. I'm not going to call it logout because this one is called logout, so I'll call it logout API call. And then, yeah, that's all we need. And we'll set that to use logout mutation. All right, and then I also just need to initialize dispatch, because we do need to dispatch this logout. When we have a mutation or a query in an API slice, we don't need to use dispatch. We create it here. But when we just have a regular function where we're not making an asynchronous request, then we need to call dispatch around it. So we need to set that to use dispatch. And then if we want to navigate, we need to create, let's say, navigate. Set that to use navigate. Did I bring that in? No, I didn't bring in use navigate. So we need to say import use navigate from React Router DOM. Okay, and then down here, so I'm going to await on the logout API call. And again, I'm just going to call .unwrap. So that will actually make the request, which will destroy the cookie. And then we're going to dispatch the logout, the local logout, which will just clear the local storage. And then we're going to navigate to the index page. And then if there's an error, then let's just console log error. All right, so now we'll come over here, and I'm going to go and click logout, and there we go. And you can see that the token, the cookie, just disappeared when I did that. Now, one thing I want to do is have a spinner. So when we sign in, like right now, if I do that, there is a point where it is loading, and we actually brought that into the login screen. So right here is loading. So we might as well take advantage of that. And let's put it let's see, I'm going to put it right above the button. So we can just check and say if is loading, then, so I'm just using the double ampersand. So if loading, then show, I guess for now, just an H2 and loading. We'll create a spinner in a minute, but let's just see if that works. So yeah, you can see it flashes loading. So let's create a quick loader or spinner component. So I'm going to create a new component called loader.jsx, and React Bootstrap actually has a spinner component. So we're going to bring that in. So let's say import spinner from React Bootstrap, and we'll call this function, actually let me just do RAFCE. So loader, and let's see, we're going to return a spinner. And we don't have to put anything in there. What we need to do is just add some props. So I'm going to say animation and set that to border. And you can look in the docs for the different options here. For the role, let's say status. And I'm just going to put some styles, which we're going to use double curly braces here. Let's set a width of 100 pixels. This needs quotes. Wait, width. Why is this? Yeah, that should be good. So width 100 pixels and then comma. Then the height, which I'm also going to set to 100 pixels. And what else do we want? Margin, let's set that to auto because we want that to be in the middle. And we'll set display to block. Okay, so now let's close that up and bring the loader into the login screen. So import loader. Why isn't it popping up? Import loader from /component/loader. And then down here, instead of this H2, let's change that and say if is loading, then we want the loader. So we'll save. Let's see what happens. So if I click sign in, you can see it flashes real quick. All right. Now we want to do the register next. So the sign up. And the first step, so again, you're going to start to see a workflow here. The first step is to put the endpoint in here in the slice. So we have login, we have logout. I'm actually just going to copy this login, and then we'll go right under it and paste that in, and let's call this register. And the endpoint is just going to be the user's URL, because remember, if we make a post request to API users, that's our register. And we're going to keep body data and passing in the data because that's going to be the name, email, and password. And then to export, remember the convention, it's going to be use register mutation. And then we can go into our register screen. Let's see, we can close the header up. Let's go into our register screen. And we can probably copy some stuff from our login screen. So like, for instance, this use selector and use dispatch, we're going to need that. Let's see, we're going to need use effect. So right here, use effect. And then what else? The toast and the loader, we can bring those in. And then we want to bring in the mutation that we just created. So that's going to be use register mutation. And we're also going to want this set credentials because remember, when we register, we log in directly after. So we're going to want to set those credentials once we register. So I want to bring that in as well. And then let's see, we also want to initialize our navigate and dispatch. So that I'll put right here. The, let's see, the user info. So we're going to want that. Any component where you want to get the user info, it's just this single line here. And of course, bringing in use selector. Now, to get the register mutation, we're going to do similar to what we did right here. So I'll actually copy that. And in register, what we'll do is change this to our register mutation. And we'll call this, instead of login, we'll call this register. And then for the use effect, just like we did here, we're going to check for the user. And if there is a user, we want to navigate to the home page, because obviously we don't want you to go to the register page if you're already logged in, you're already registered. So that can stay the same. And yeah, and then in the submit handler, let's get rid of this console log, and let's just do, let's check the password first, because we have a confirm password field. So we'll say if password is not equal to confirm password, then we'll show an error. Let's say toast.error, and we'll say passwords do not match. Else, if they do match, then we'll do a try catch, and in here we're going to basically do the same thing we did here, right? In fact, I'll copy these 3 lines, except instead of login, we're going to call register, and instead of just the email and password, we're going to pass in name, email, and password. Same thing here, we're going to dispatch set credentials, because register will give us the user data back, and then we're going to set the credentials, meaning we're going to log them in. And then we're going to navigate to slash. All right, and then if there's an error, we'll just show it in a toast, just like we did here. So very, very similar to what we did in login. And also we can add the loader. So down right up above the button, we can say if is loading, then show the loader. So I think we're ready to try to register a user. What's this? Use navigate not defined. Did I not bring that in? Thought I did. Oh, right here. We need to bring in use navigate. All right, so now I'm going to try to register a new user. So we'll say Brad. Of course, you can put whatever you want here. Say Brad at Gmail. 1 2 3 4 5 6. 1 2 3 4 5 6. Sign up. And there we go. We saw that it did the little spinner, and now we see Brad Traversy at the top here. So it looks like everything went okay. And if I were to open up Compass and reload my data, now I have this Brad Traversy user, and I registered this user through the front end, through our application. So hopefully this is starting to kind of make sense to you. I think that this is pretty neat, as opposed to what we would do with just vanilla Redux, having like an actions file and so on. It kind of, with the thunk middleware, and it can get quite messy. All right, now the last thing that we want to do is have the ability to see the profile, which is basically just going to be a form that has our email and name, and we also want the ability to update our email, name, and password. So let's create a new screen. So let's see, screens, we're going to say new, call it ProfileScreen.jsx, and for now I'm just going to do RAFCE. And then I want to add the route. However, I don't want just anyone to be able to go to this, right? If I go to my main.jsx and I bring in, we're going to want to do this anyway, so we might as well. So let's import profile screen. And then if I, go ahead and do profile screen, path is going to be /profile. If I do that and then I log out, so right now I'm not logged in, and if I go to profile, it lets me go there, and I don't want that. We have to be logged in. Now, even though in the backend we have protections against updating your profile, you still want, for the user experience, you still don't want the users to be able to come to the profile page. because there could be data that you don't want them to see or whatever. So you want to have a private route component, and that's what we're going to create. So in components, let's create a new file called private. So it's going to be called PrivateRoute.jsx. And this is actually going to be pretty simple. So we're going to just import a couple things from React Router. We want navigate, not use navigate, but navigate, which is actually a component that you can use to redirect rather than a function. And then we also want the outlet, and that's going to be from React dash, why isn't it popping up? React Router DOM. All right, and then we're also going to bring in use selector. I don't know why it's not popping up, but that's going to be from React-Redux, because we want to be able to get the user info from the state, because if there's user info, then we want to allow it. If there's not, we want to redirect them. So let's say RAFCE, we have our private route, and we're going to go above the return and get the user info. So in curly braces here, we want user info, and we can get that from use selector, and that takes in a function with state, and then we want to get state.auth. That'll give us the user info. Then what we want to return here depends on if there's user info or not. If there is, then we just want this to be the outlet, which will show whatever the route is. Else, then we want it to navigate. So we're going to use the navigate component, which takes in a to prop, and that'll go to /login. And we're just going to add replace onto this too, or it could give us some crazy stuff. So now, and that's pretty simple. So to implement this, we go back to our main.jsx, and we need to bring that component in. So let's say import private route. It's really annoying that's not auto-completing. Import that from ./component/private route. And then what we have to do is just basically wrap whatever routes we want to be private. We just want to wrap with a route component. And for path, we can just put an empty string. And then for element, we want to set that to the private route. So we want to say private route. Make sure you put an ending angle bracket, and then we want to move that into there. Okay, and we could even put a comment right here and just say private routes. Okay, so anything else private, just make sure you put it in between here. Now I'll save that, and notice it took me to the login. If I try to go to profile, I can't. Now I'll log in. I'm going to log in as brad@gmail. And now if I go to profile, it lets me. Okay. Now the profile screen is going to be pretty similar to the other forms. So I think what I'll do is copy, let's copy the register screen here. And then we'll go and close that up. Yeah, so I'm just going to paste in the register screen, but I'm going to change the name of the component here, and then at the bottom to profile screen. And let's see, we're going to go up to the top here and figure out what we don't need. We don't need the register mutation. We're going to keep set credentials, because if they change their info, we want to reset the credentials, right? Loader, we'll keep that. Toast, form, yeah, I think we're going to pretty much keep all of this stuff. We don't need row and column, though, because we don't need that last part where it says, not registered, then log in. And then let's see, for the state, we're going to keep the same stuff here. We're going to keep that. We want to get the user info. We don't want the register mutation. We can get rid of that. So for the use effect, what I want to do is fill, we're not going to redirect here because obviously if you're logged in, if the user info is there, you don't want to redirect. So we can get rid of that and get rid of these dependencies. But what I do want to do here is set the name to whatever is in userinfo.name. And I want to do the same for email. So this one will be set email. And then we just need to add into here userinfo.setName, userinfo.setEmail. Okay, and then let's see, submit handler, we're just gonna, we want to keep the password check, but this stuff here, the try catch, I'm gonna just get rid of for now and just say console.log submit. I just want to get the form displayed right now. So moving on down here, let's change the title here, the H1 to update profile. And then let's see, we have our form group for the name. So this stuff can pretty much, yeah, this can all stay the same, except at the very bottom where we have this row, we don't need this part, so we can get rid of that. And let's change sign up to update. Is loading is not defined. Oh, so right here, we're going to get rid of that as well. And there we go. So we have user profile, and it has my name and email. We're not going to pre-fill the password, but we will be able to update the password. We're going to do that in a second. But yeah, so now we're logged in. We can go to our profile screen here. And the last step is to be able to update this. So again, in order to do that, we're going to go to our user API slice, and we're going to add to this. Let's go under logout, and let's say update user. Actually, I'm just going to copy. I'll just copy register. Okay, and we'll call this update user. And let's see, it's going to be user's URL / profile, but it's going to be a put request. And we're going to send data. And then we want to export it with use, let's see, what are we going to call it? Use update user mutation. And we can close that up. So now in our profile here, let's bring in up at the top, we'll go right here and say, actually, first of all, we need to bring the mutation in. So let's import use update user mutation from / slices users API slice. And then we'll go right under where we get our user info, and let's say const with brackets, set that to use update user mutation. And I'm going to call this update profile. And we can also get is loading so that we can put that loader back. Okay, and then, yeah, let's put the loader back. So right above the button, oops, we'll say is loading, then show loader. Okay, now in the submit, so right here in the submit handler, we're going to get rid of this console log, and let's put our try catch back. And in the try, we're going to say const res, set that equal to await, and call update profile. Now that's going to take in an object with underscore ID, set that to user info dot underscore ID, and then name, email, and password. Okay, and we do want to unwrap that as well. And then we want to dispatch the set credentials. So set credentials, and we're going to pass in there an object spread across res, or we could just pass in res. And then let's do a success toast. So we'll say toast.success, and let's say profile updated. Okay, and then if there's an error, we'll say toast.error, and we'll pass in here err.data.message or err.error. So that should let us update. So let's come over here now, and I'm just going to change my email to brad@email.com and update. So it says profile updated. If I reload, it's still brad@email. Now if I log out, we should be able to log in now with brad@email instead of the Gmail. So there we go. I was able to update it. So if I want to update my name, I'll just change it to Brad and click update. And notice it also updated right here as well. This reacted to our update. Okay, so I mean, that's pretty much it. And it's, this took a while, and I mean, it's quite a bit of code for small functionality, but you can now use this as a starting point for other single page applications, MERN stack applications, where you want to use this authentication system. And it's easy to protect your routes because we created that auth middleware in the back end. It's easy to create private routes in the front end. So yeah, that's that. So in the final part of this video, in this project, we're going to deploy to Linode. All right, so we're going to get ready to deploy to Linode/Akamai, and there's just a couple of things we need to do to prepare for production. So right now what's going on is we have our back end that runs on localhost 5000, and then we have our front end, which is the Vite dev server, which runs on 3000. So when we're in production, we're not going to have that dev server. So what we need to do is build out our static assets with npm run build, and then we need our backend server to point to the index.html that's in that build folder or that dist folder. So let's go into the terminal and make sure you're in your front end, and let's do npm run build. And what this is going to do is build out our static assets. If you're using Vite, it'll be in this dist folder, right? And if you're using create react app, it'll be called build. Okay, the folder will be called build. And inside that is the index.html, which is basically the entry point to our React application in production. So we're going to open up our server.js, and we're going to go down here where I just have this index route that says server is ready. I'm going to go right above that, and I'm going to check to see if we're in production. So let's say if process.env.node_env is equal to production. Okay, so if that's true, then first thing I'm going to do is just set a variable of _dir name and set that to path.resolve. Now, the path module is part of Node.js, so we just need to bring it in up top. We don't have to, oh, I actually already did. So just make sure you import path. And then we're just setting the root directory, and then we're going to run app.use, and we want to make this folder, so front end dist, we want to make that a static folder so we can just access it directly. So in app.use, we can say express.static, and then we just basically want to point to that dist folder. So I'm going to use path.join to join together our folders and files, and in the join, we're going to add our _dir name, and then we're going to add front end / and then dist for me because I'm using Vite. If you're using create react app, you'll want to put front end / build. All right, and then what I'm going to do is add a route. So make sure you're in this if statement, and we're going to say app.get, and we're going to use just the universal wildcard character, the asterisk. So if we get any routes that's not, API/users, then we want to just show the dist index HTML. So let's add our callback here. So request response, and then what I want to do here is res dot, and then we have a send file method, because that's what we want to do, is we want to basically direct them to that index HTML. So now in here we can say path dot resolve, and let's close that up. And in the path resolve, I'm going to add _dir name, and then from there we want to go to front end, and from there we want to go to the dist folder or the build folder, and then from there we want our index HTML. Okay, so we're making this dist folder a static folder with this line, and then here we're saying any route that we hit that's not this API users is going to load that index HTML. Now in the else, so else meaning we're in development, then we don't really need to load that index HTML because we're using the Vite dev server or the create react app dev server. So what I'll do is just put this in here, and it will just say server is ready. All right, so now to kind of test this out before we actually deploy, excuse me, we're going to go to our env and let's set it to production. So now if I run just the server, so I'll go into my other terminal here, I can stop that, and if I run npm run server, remember that runs just Express, our localhost 5000, but since we compiled our front end into this dist folder and we set that as a static folder and we set it to point to it, now if I go to localhost 5000, it takes us to our application. And if you have the React extension installed in Chrome, you can see it will say this page is using the production build of React rather than the dev server. All right, so now we should be ready for production or to deploy. So I'm going to just this .env really doesn't matter. It's not going to go onto the server. We're going to create our own .env on the server. So I'm going to set this back to development. Okay, now what we want to do is go to linode.com, and of course if you don't have an account, create one. And again, I have that link in the description to give you $100 free over 60 days. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. And you're going to see a dashboard like this. And you can see I already have a couple Linodes here. And Linode is just what they call these little servers. They're basically just Linux instances. And they can be different distros too. I like to use Ubuntu, but you can use just about anything. So first thing you're going to want to do is create a new Linode. And the default distribution is Debian 11. But again, I like to use Ubuntu, so I'm going to choose Ubuntu 2304. And then you want to select a region that's close to you. Select New Jersey. And then as far as the plans go, I'd suggest this one here, dedicated 4 gigabytes, which has a cap of $36 a month. And remember, with that link that I gave you, you're going to get $100 free over 2 months. So you'll be able to use this package for free for 2 months. Okay, and then let's come down here. You can rename it if you want. I'm just going to call it YouTube-Linode, and then enter a root password. Make sure it's secure. Actually, I don't think I typed that right. All right, and you can also set up SSH keys. You can see I do have one set up, and then that's it. Let's click on Create Linode, and it will just take a few minutes for your analytics to show up, but your server should be ready, and this is your IP address, okay? Make sure you use your own. And this is the SSH command that you can use to connect to your server. So let's actually copy that and then open up a terminal, and then I'm going to paste that in here and connect to my server. The first time you log in, it's going to ask if you want to continue. Just say yes, and then you want to put in your password. Okay, so now we're logged into our server, And there's just a little provisioning that I want to do. For one, I don't want to stay using the root user. It's good practice to create a separate user. And if you're going into production, I would suggest using SSH keys and disabling passwords. It's just an extra security step, but we're not going to do that for this tutorial, but we will create a new user. But before we do that, let's just update everything, all of our packages, our lists. So we're going to say apt, which is, the aptitude package manager, and then we'll say update and apt. So you can do apt or apt-get, but we're going to do apt upgrade, and that will just get everything up to date. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is create a new user. And if you do who am I mean, it says it right here, root at localhost, but if we run who am I, you see I'm logged in as root. So I'm going to add a new user with the add user command, and I'm going to call my user Brad. Of course, you can call it whatever you want. And then you want to give it a password. And repeat that. Okay, and then it's just going to ask for some information. You can just enter through this and say yes. Okay, so now we have a new user named Brad, and it's added to the group of users. Now I want this user to be, I want it to be able to make commands as root. So you want to add it to the sudo group. So to do that, we can say user mod, and then dash lowercase a uppercase g, and then sudo, because that's the group I want to add this user to, and then the username, which for me is Brad. Okay, so now if I do groups, Brad, it shows me the groups that I'm in. And you're going to be in a group with the same name as your user, also the users group, and now also sudo. Okay, so next thing we'll do is log in as that user. So we can do that with su and then space hyphen space and then the username that we want to log in as. So it's just telling us that now we have to use sudo to run commands as administrator. But you can see now it says Brad at localhost. Also, if I say who am I, it'll give me Brad. So now that we've done that, let's start with our application. And of course, we need Node.js installed. If we say node -- version, by default, it's not found. So we do have to install it. And I'm going to just show you a page real quick that shows us how to install on Ubuntu. So we want version 20, which is the latest. So we need to run these two commands, this curl command, which will get us the package, and then we install it with this command here. All right, so you can either copy this, you can copy it from my blog post, or if you want to go to this URL, like if I click this button, it'll actually grab both commands. So let's go ahead and paste that in. Password. All right, so it's going to grab the package and then it's going to go ahead and install it. And if you see this screen, just hit enter. All right, now if I do node -- version, you can see I have version 21.0, and if I do npm -- version, we should also have npm. All right, now we need a place to put our application. So we're in the root directory now. That's what this tilde means. So I'm going to make a directory, so mkdir, called apps. And then we'll cd into apps. And this is where I want to put the application. So I'm going to use git to get my files on the server. So if I go to GitHub, I'm going to go to that repository. And you guys should have already pushed your app to GitHub. And let's see, MERN auth, this is the one I want. So I'm going to just go to code here. I don't have SSH keys set up, so I'm going to choose the HTTPS and just copy that link. Okay, so now actually we can close that up. So now we can go ahead and just do a git clone, and then I'm going to paste in that link I just copied. And now, if I do an ls, you'll see we have the MERN auth folder. Let's cd into MERN auth, do an ls-a, that'll show us everything. So we have a .env-example because I didn't push my .env to GitHub. So what we want to do is rename that to .env on the server. So let's say mv and then .env-example, and we want to rename it to .env. So now if I do ls-a, we can see .env. So let's edit that file. I'm going to use nano, so nano.env. And then I'm going to change, and there's different ways to use environment variables on the server, but this one is really easy. So we're just going to change this to production, and it's going to run on port 5000. However, we're going to set up NGINX as a proxy so that we can access our app through port 80, which is the HTTP app port. So the Mongo URI, we're going to need that. So I'm going to grab mine from this .env file right here. So if we go ahead and copy that, and I should be able to paste it in. Yep, so now we have that set, and if you want to change the secret, JWT secret, you can. But that should do it. So I'm going to do Command or Control X, and then hit Y for yes, I want to save, and then enter. And if you want to check, make sure the file's saved, you can use the cat command and do env. That'll just show you what's in that file. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is install our dependencies and build out our front-end assets. So we'll start off with npm install in the root. So that will install all of our server dependencies. It's just going to create a node modules folder just like it did locally. But we don't push our node modules to GitHub, so we don't have that. So we have to run this again on the server. And then we're going to cd into front end and run npm install or npm I. All right, and now let's run npm run build from the front end. And that will create a dist folder. And that dist folder has the index.html, which is the front end of our application. All right, cool. Now, before we go ahead and run, or try to run our application, you need to make it so that your MongoDB Atlas will actually accept connections from our server, because right now you probably have it set up to just your local machine. So if we go to MongoDB and log in, right now you probably have, if you go to network access, you probably have just your local IP address, like your machine at home or wherever you're building from. So you're going to have to do one of two things. You can either add the IP address of the server, which would be whatever you have here, or you could just allow from anywhere, which is what I did. So that's why you see this 000, because I clicked this and then I said allow from anywhere. I don't have that option anymore because I already chose it, but you can do that, or again, you can just put the server IP address. But your server needs to be allowed access to your database. All right, so once you do that, we can close that up. Let's jump back over to our terminal, and for now, we're just going to run npm start. Actually, you want to do this from the root. So npm start, which runs our server.js. And you can see MongoDB connected. Now, it's running on port 5000, so if I go to my IP address, I'm going to copy that, make sure you use your own, and then if I go to :5000, you should see your application. But you don't want to have to go to :5000, and you also don't want to have to keep it running in your terminal, because if I stop this, then I try to go there, it's not going to work. All right, so what we need to do are two things. We need to set up a process manager so that we can run our app as a process in the background. So even if we close the terminal and we get rid of our connection here, it'll still be running. And then we also want to use NGINX as a proxy so that we can go through port 80 so that we don't have to add a colon and a port. And then of course, if you want to add a domain name, you can move on and do that. So let's start off with the process manager. So we're going to npm, actually now that we're we're using not the root user, we can say sudo, or we have to say sudo, npm install, and I'm going to install this globally. So -g, and then PM2 is the name of the process manager. And this is really simple. So basically, we can just use this like we do npm to start the application, but it will be ran as a process. So we can say PM2, and we want to start, and then backend /server.js. And now it's been the application is running. If I go back here and reload, it should work, and my terminal is freed up, and I can exit out of this, and it will still be running as a process. Okay, so now we have the issue of the port, right? We don't want port 5000. I don't even want people to access port 5000. So that's the next step, is we're going to enable our firewall. So let's say sudo, and then UFW is the default firewall. So we're going to enable it. And it says it may disrupt connections. We'll say yes for that. All right, now if I reload this, you'll see it's still trying to connect. It doesn't work because I enabled the firewall, which by default, all the ports are blocked. So we do want to enable the ports for HTTP, HTTPS, and SSH. So to do that, we can say sudo UFW allow, and let's say SSH, and then we want to do allow HTTP, and then we want to do allow HTTPS. You can also put the actual port numbers. So the next thing is to set up NGINX, because that's how we can have our app basically run through port 80. So let's say sudo apt install NGINX. Say yes. And for this, just hit enter. All right, so now we have NGINX installed. And if we were to go to just our root domain here, you should see just welcome to NGINX. So the next step is to configure our application so that we can access it through the root domain. So we're going to edit a specific file. Let's say sudo nano, and then it's going to be /etc/sites-available, and then /default. So you should see a file like this. And what we want to do is go down to where we have the location block, which is right here. Okay, and if you add a domain name, you would put the domain here. So for instance, if I were to use traversy testing.dev, and I would also put the www version. All right, so that's if I wanted a domain. Now, in the location block, we're actually going to get rid of this stuff. So we're going to clear out everything in here. Excuse me. I don't know why my option isn't working. All right, so we want to clear that out. And what I'm going to paste in here, you can get from the blog post in the description, or you can type it out if you want. So I'm going to just paste this in. Whoops, this also has the location. So I want to make sure I don't have that twice. So I'm going to get rid of that last one and get rid of that. All right. So in location / you should have this proxy pass. So basically our app is running on the server, which is localhost because we're logged into the server, and on port 5000. But adding this here will allow us to access it through the root domain through basically our HTTP port. All right, so that should be all we need to do. So we can go ahead and do Control X, yes to save, and then enter. And then we just want to reload NGINX, and we can do that with sudo service nginx restart. And you can check the nginx config file by just saying nginx-t. Let's see, alert could not open log file. Oh, I just need to do sudo. So sudo. Okay, so it says the configuration file syntax is okay, test is successful. So we should be ready. So now let's go to the browser and let's reload this page, and there we go. So our project is now deployed. However, I do want to mention that your JSON Web Token isn't going to get stored in the HTTP only cookie unless you have a domain and an SSL certificate, because it has to be HTTPS. So that's another level of security to putting it in the HTTP only cookie. So you should be able to log in or create a user. You just won't be able to access any protected routes. And our protected routes are actually the only one we have that we're using is the update profile. So we should be able to create an account. Let's just go ahead and do that real quick. So I'll register. So I am logged into the front end, but if I try to make a request, like let's say I want to change my name here and update, you'll see it says not authorized, no token, because that HTTP only cookie was not created because I'm not secure right now. I'm not using HTTPS. Now, if you did want to move further and add a domain and an SSL, you can look in Linode documentation, but I'll just show you real quick. So I use Namecheap for my domains, but of course you could use whatever you want. And if I go to my dashboard here, and let's just say I want to use this Traversy testing.dev. So if I go to manage and then under name servers, you want to add your custom DNS name servers. And the ones you want to add for Linode are going to be ns1.linode.com through ns5. So we can just copy that and paste those in, and then just change this to 2, change that to 3, 4, and 5. So once you do that, that will take up to 48 hours to propagate, as you can see here. But once you do that, you can go over to Linode and just go to domains, create domain, add in the domain you want to use, like Traversy testing.dev, and then your email address. I'll just put that in there. And then here, you just want to insert your default records from one of your Linodes, and then make sure you choose the one that you want, because you could have multiple domains in multiple servers. Once you do that, it will create the domain here, and it will add the correct records for you, the correct A records and all that. And again, this will take, up to 48 hours to kick in. And then to install an SSL, you could use something like Certbot. So if you search for a domain, not domain, what am I doing? Linode, Certbot. So right here, you could go along with this. So you can install it, sudo apt install certbot, and you can configure it for nginx with the --nginx flag. All right, and then you just go through the steps here. That will add an SSL, and then your application will be able to save the JSON Web Token in the HTTP only cookie. All right, so that's it, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this project and learned something from it. And again, you can kind of use this as just a starting point for single-page MERN applications where you want to have custom authentication. All right, thanks, guys, and I will see you in the next one.